Chapter 1066. Kuang Yi and Qin Tian both stayed in Linshan City. Only their trusted aides left the city to inform the higher-ups of Yang Qindong's request. Linshan City regained its usual peace. A few days later, news of the little southern Ming prince and Yangzhong prince being captured in the Guizhou division was spread. At this point, the little southern Ming army was disbanded. Under the leadership of General Meng Ning, their army joined the 3rd Province Prince Zhu Huizhou's army. Meng Ning brought over 300,000 troops. Adding on Zhu Huizhou's original army, even without the 100,000 from the Bangladesh army, he still had 500,000 troops. Young master, this. After Beta Persei received the news, he looked worriedly at Yang Qindong. What are you afraid of? 500,000 isn't a small number, but with 3 provinces, how many troops do you think he can transfer to Linshan City? Or how many troops would he need to deal with us? After Yang Qindong asked 2 questions in a row, he smiled and patted Beta Persei's shoulder. Don't worry, the plan won't change. Yang Qindong was indeed full of confidence. He predicted that Zhu Huizhou wouldn't make an enemy out of the 5-star army. After all, the time to prove his strength had passed. Now that he had been recruited as the 3rd province prince, there was no need to create more problems. If they really fought, Zhu Huizhou didn't have the confidence to win. Not to mention there was one more thing that he didn't mention. Yao Yingjun had taken Zhu Lian and escaped from the Guizhou department. Not only that, they had also created an army of 50,000 people and were currently fighting for territory in the 3 provinces. Speaking of which, this was out of Yang Qindong's expectations. Yao Yingjun was a chess piece he placed in the little southern Ming prince's faction. Now that this faction was destroyed, he had completed his mission. Yao Yingjun thought the same. He even wanted to bring Princess Yingjun out and find a safe place in Xianxia so that she could live the rest of her life without worries. Who would have thought that at this time, a woman would actually show that she was not inferior to men? After learning that her 2nd brother had betrayed her and her eldest brother and 3rd brother had been captured, she actually took up the responsibility. Moreover, she really allowed him to persuade some of the small South Ming soldiers outside of the Guizhou division to rebuild the mountain. When this matter was reported to Yang Qindong through the intelligence network, he was also surprised for a while. Thinking about it, this was a good thing. He didn't have to pay a price to make his opponent restless, so why not? Yang Qindong agreed and sent someone to inform Yao Yingjun that if things did not go well, he could still bring Princess Yongxing to the Langshan shelter. At the same time, he also told him that if he needed financial support, he could ask. With all of this, Yang Qindong was sure that Zhu Huizhou, who seemed to be very powerful, would not make an enemy out of the 5-star army. Things developed as he expected. When the people sent by Qin Tian met with the 3 provincial kings and told them about Yang Qindong's request, the 3 provincial kings who tried to assassinate his brother quickly agreed to all of the conditions. Zhu Huizhou agreed to Yang Qindong's request and recognized the legitimacy of the shelter. As long as any Han citizen went there, regardless of their status, they wouldn't pursue the matter. Not only that, every year he would provide 200,000 Han citizens to the shelter as compensation for attacking the 5-star army. In exchange, Crimson City's goods could be provided to Zhu Huihua at the same price as other merchants. Originally, Yang Qindong wanted to provide 500,000 people a year, but Qin Tian refused. In his words, 200,000 was already a lot. At most, the 3 provinces wouldn't have enough Han citizens, and they could just grab some from the nearby southern Ming province. However, 500,000 a year, they wouldn't be able to catch that many. Actually, 200,000 a year was already enough to satisfy Yang Qindong. Originally, he was just asking for an exorbitant price, waiting for the other party to bargain. Giving 30 to 50,000 people a year was already what he had expected. Now 200,000 a year was already a pleasant surprise. Not long after, the southern Ming Emperor Zhu Xian also agreed. After discussing with the court officials, they finally agreed to sell the silk, tea leaves and porcelain to the 5-star army. This was something that couldn't be helped. Many areas in the south of the southern Ming Empire had already been occupied by the 5-star army. If they didn't agree, they wouldn't be able to sell these things for money. As for those skilled workers, since when did the great Ming Empire value craftsmen? If they were gone, they could just nurture them again. As they all agreed, the negotiations with the 2 sides went very smoothly, reaching Yang Qindong's expectations. After the negotiations were completed, Yang Qindong knew that he had to leave this place. Even Linchin City and Siming residents had to be given up. These were the bargaining chips in the negotiations. Retreat. Since he had achieved his goal, Yang Qindong gave the order to retreat. Hundreds of thousands of five-star army escorted the 40,000 prisoners out of Linchin City. At this time the battle ended and everything returned to normal. However, any smart person could tell that this wasn't the end. Once the two sides started fighting again, they wouldn't stop until one side was dead. The five-star army finally retreated, leaving behind Linchin City and Siming residents. At the same time, Zhou Xian also left behind two opponents, Everlasting Victory Princess and Sheeping King's army. Everlasting Victory Princess didn't need to be mentioned. When Zhou Xian made his move, he didn't plan to let this sister go. As for Sheeping King, he was originally the king of Yunnan. Now that the three provincial kings wanted to replace him, how could he agree? Of course he had to find some trouble. Zhu Qizhen didn't think highly of the three provincial kings, but he had to agree to reduce internal friction. Now that Sheeping King was willing to fight with Zhou Xian, he was happy to see it happen. He didn't say anything and just let them fight. After Yang Qindong left southern Ming's territory, he didn't pay attention to it anymore. Xianxia's territory was so big that there were too many things for him to worry about. For example, there was a piece of information in front of him about the Baiming army. The telegram was sent by the commander of the First Army, Tiger's Man. It only said one thing. The Baiming army had a 50,000-man cavalry. They were all soldiers from the Liaodong region and were nicknamed the Liaodong Iron Cavalry. Under the leadership of General Fang Dingshan, they were training in the grasslands. They constantly clashed with the small Mongolian tribes and sometimes provoked Yeshen and Walla. They won and lost. According to Tiger's Man's telegram, the 50,000-man Liaodong Iron Cavalry followed the policy of training soldiers through battles. Fang Dingshan used to be the commander of Zhu Qiyu's imperial bodyguards. He was quite trusted and was given a lot of freedom on this expedition. Since their appearance, the Baiming army's banner became famous in the grasslands and had a certain amount of influence. They're all restless people. Yang Qindong sighed and then looked at another telegram. It was sent by the Internal Intelligence Department of the Japanese Empire. The internal strife there had already begun, and some places had already broken out of the control of the emperor and the great general's office. In other words, it wouldn't be long before the Japanese empire's affairs had to be resolved. Thinking about Princess Junko, who had returned more than a year ago, Yang Qindong looked in the direction of the Japanese empire and said to himself, "Don't let anything happen to you. Otherwise, a lot of people will be buried with you." January 1457 AD. Yang Qindong returned to Xi'an City and prepared to spend the new year here. At the same time, he accompanied his wife Hu Yen to wait for her delivery. On the 7th day of the second lunar month, on this seemingly ordinary day, a baby boy was born. When Yang Qindong was 20 years old, he finally had his first son, named Yang Bo Bugnam of Gojoseon finally had a son, and there was someone to inherit the family name. Naturally, it was a great day for the entire Xianxia. Xi'an City was immediately decorated, and it was even more lively than the new year. The various provinces and regions under the Yang faction also sent representatives to the city with gifts to celebrate and express their joy. Good things come in pairs. On the third day after Yang Bo was born, King Abu Burkle of the Great F country announced his surrender in Cotton Orchid Island. After more than half a year of siege, the city was already in chaos. Originally, Abu Burkle wanted to continue supporting because he still had soldiers and food in his hands. However, the people had already had enough of these days of fear. Under the instigation of the intelligence department in the city, they rushed into the city and surrounded the palace. The power of the people was great, especially when it came to their own safety. Often they could exert unimaginable power. Facing the flood of people, the soldiers of the Great F country did not stop them. In the end, Abu Burkle was captured. The city gate was opened and he was sent to the cold front navy that surrounded the city. With the capture of Abu Burkle, the fall of the Great F country was announced, and the entire Luzon Island was unified. At this point, the Great F country and the original Sulu country were all under Xia's control. Xianxia also gained more than 6 million people, and its strength increased by a large margin. In more than a year, Siam and the Great F country were divided. With more than 10 million people, Xiaxia's strength was evident. However, this time, Yang Qindong only moved the 6 million people in Siam's current Thai province. Half of the 3 million people were moved to other provinces. The 6 million people in Luzon Island were not moved. They were reserved for the next move to the Japanese Empire. At that time, 5 million people would be sent to the Japanese Empire. Yes, Yang Qindong had raised his butcher's knife. The next target of his plan was the Japanese Empire. The reason why he said it was a plan was because Yang Qindong could not guarantee that there would not be other accidents. For example, the sudden appearance of the 50,000 Liaodong Iron Cavalry in Baiming was an accident. According to the report of the new army commander Tiger's Mane, this Iron Cavalry was very arrogant on the grassland. Not only did they have the opportunity to clash with the Walla Iron Cavalry, but they also occasionally encountered caravans that traded with the first city. Although they could not kill and rob, they still had to pay for the passage. Chapter 1067. Perhaps it was because the Liaodong Iron Cavalry was short of money, or perhaps they didn't want to provoke a powerful existence like the 5-star army right away. But even if they didn't kill anyone, they just wanted money, which made some caravans that cooperated with the first city suffer. During this time, many merchants came to the door and complained to Tiger's Man. According to them, they would rather give the money to the 5-star army than to the Liaodong Iron Cavalry. The appearance of the Liaodong Iron Cavalry greatly changed many people's view of Baiming. Is this still the army of the Great Ming Dynasty? Why are they so barbaric? How are they different from the bandits on the grassland? Are they still the grass-eating Han Chinese? Previously there was the 5-star army and now there was Baiming's Liaodong Iron Cavalry. What changed them? For this matter, Tiger's Man sent a telegram to Yang Qindong more than once, asking if he wanted to attack them. After all, one mountain couldn't accommodate 2 tigers. It was enough to have the 5-star army on the grassland. Yang Qindong suppressed Tiger's Man's intention to attack. He now had a target to conquer: the Japanese Empire. This was a country with a population of more than 10 million people. If he wanted to conquer them, the preparation work must be very thorough. The people of the Japanese Empire were very fertile. This could be seen from their names such as Dairo, Aro, Saburo. There were even 7 and 8 Dairo. This might have something to do with the environment they lived in and their development over the years. It was very easy for each region to be independent. Sometimes, even 2 counties that were very close to each other would see each other as fire and water and would fight with each other. At that time, whoever had more people would often have the advantage. For a country with such a large population, Yang Qindong must be well prepared. He couldn't afford to be distracted. Not to mention that in his heart, it was difficult to divide the world into 2 for a long time, and the tripartite balance was the most stable. The existence of Baiming, Southern Ming, and himself was the tripartite balance, which could ensure that any side would have to be wary of the other side when they attacked. While rejecting Tiger's Man's idea of attacking on the grassland, he also asked him to prepare the new army that had been formed for a year to be transferred to North Korea. In addition to preparing for an attack on the Japanese Empire, Yang Qindong also called the city lord Zhou Xian and other important people in the palace to discuss the introduction of paper money. The introduction of paper money was not Yang Qindong's creation. At the beginning of the Ming dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang implemented the paper money policy and issued the Ming dynasty's precious banknotes and copper coins. However, the Great Ming dynasty's banknotes did not have a limit and there was no reserve, which quickly led to inflation. Now, the Great Ming dynasty's banknotes were restricted in the market. Although they were still circulating, their purchasing power was very limited. Especially after the sudden rise of Yang Qindong, regardless of whether it was the Northern Ming or the Southern Ming, in order to achieve their goals, they vigorously printed the Great Ming banknote, which directly caused the market to become chaotic. At the same time, this item depreciated even more and there were very few people who recognized it. With this example, Yang Qindong obviously wouldn't let the same mistake happen to him. This time, not only did he want the paper money to be successful, but it also had to be strong for a long time. For this, he ordered people to vigorously develop the gold mines found on the island of Dafei as reserves. He was preparing to introduce the paper money into the market. First, it has to be anti-counterfeiting. Second, it has to be advertised properly. Third, and most important, is that it can't be casually published. The amount of reserves can only be printed to achieve the same value as gold and silver. Yang Qindong said to City Lord Zhou Xian and the people in charge of the Yang family's bank with a serious expression. After all, the circulation of gold and silver was a bit too costly. In the long run, the people who would suffer losses would be the country and the people. Could be said that the paper money was a very necessary thing. After handing over the issue of the paper money to professionals, Yang Qindong started to mobilize the troops. This time he was preparing to deal with the Japanese Empire. He was preparing to bring 150,000 soldiers. This could be said to be the largest number of soldiers he had ever brought. Among them, the 1st Cavalry Division was already making preparations to be mobilized. There was also the 1st Cavalry Division that must be brought along. This was a very elite force. With them, many things would be done with half the effort. Then there was the C4th Division, the C5th Division, the 1st Reserve Division, the 1st Division, the 2nd Division, and the 3rd Division. In total, there were close to 150,000 people. Not only were the troops ready to assemble in North Korea, Yang Qindong was also preparing 6 million people to go to the Japanese Empire. For example, Luzon Island had to prepare 5 million people, and even the provinces and regions had to prepare 1 million people. This was the preparation to uproot the entire country. At the same time, Yang Qindong took the opportunity to inspect some of the important industries in Xi'an City. Yang Qindong paid special attention to the munitions factory. 2 years ago he had brought out a Type 99 tank from the warehouse and placed it in the factory. Now that so much time had passed, he wanted to know how the imitation work was going. Imitation was one of Xianxia's main policies for industrial development. First, there would be a finished product and a method. Then he would try to learn how to do it. Only then would he be able to walk his own path. It was just like how many products and firearms were made. The Han people, who had 5,000 years of history, had never lacked intelligent people. However, this time Yang Qindong was somewhat disappointed. There was simply too much information and knowledge involved in the creation of a tank. Even though there was already a finished product in front of everyone, they had never seen how it was used. Under the circumstances of how it was used, there was no way to imitate it even if they wanted to. Therefore, this time Yang Qindong came to the munitions factory to demonstrate how to use the tank. Clear the area. Except for the necessary relevant researchers and the main leaders of the munitions factory, everyone else was cleared out of the area. Then Yang Qindong walked into the big iron tool with a tank hat on his head. Under everyone's gaze, the tank that was filled with fuel started moving. With a roar, it walked out of the secret workshop and appeared in the empty field. This scene was too much of a shock to everyone. The roaring sound had already frightened everyone. When they saw that this thing could already move under the control of a single person, everyone present widened their eyes and looked like they had been shocked silly. Then an even more shocking scene appeared. After the tank arrived at the field, it first moved quickly and skillfully turned. Along the way, it knocked down many obstacles that had been prepared beforehand. Then it stood still and fired at an area that had been marked out long ago. In the roar of the explosion, the target area a few miles away was hit and smoke rose from it. Plop. This eye-popping scene attracted everyone present to kneel. Even the city lord Yu Qian, who accompanied Yang Qindong to watch, and Yang Heir, who had been following Yang Qindong for many years and had long been accustomed to various miracles, also knelt on the ground. Yang Qindong was very powerful. He was once called the Lord God, as if he was a god that had descended to earth. But even if they were fully prepared, the moment they saw the shell fired, everyone was still shocked and knelt on the ground. They didn't dare to imagine. If this iron tool were to be used on a large scale, once it appeared on the battlefield, who would have the ability to stop it? They were afraid that when the time came, it would only be a rush and the thousands of soldiers and horses would be scared silly and scattered. When everyone knelt on the ground, the tank extinguished the fire and stopped. Yang Qindong, with a tank hat on his head, got out of the cockpit. His appearance here attracted loud shouts that shook the heavens and the earth. If one listened carefully, they would hear the three lords of God talking non-stop. Well, this thing is somewhat magical, but it's more of a function of technology. So, you choose 2 people and I'll teach them how to drive and operate it. When Yang Qindong's voice resounded in the training ground for these 2 places, the people below could be said to be red in the face and ears. They all wanted to feel the power of this iron tool, and they all wanted to be in close contact with the divine object. For a full 10 days, except for going back to the palace to visit his son and daughter at night, Yang Qindong stayed in the training ground most of the time. And this place had been taken over by Long Wei. No one was allowed to approach without orders, or they had the right to act first and report later. It was precisely because they had seen the power of the tank that Long Wei believed that any level of defense was appropriate. In 10 days, the 2 disciples taught by Yang Chendong had barely finished their apprenticeship. Next, they could only rely on continuous practice to reach the level of familiarity. After that, Yang Chendong left the training ground and returned to the palace. There was news from the Japanese Empire that internal strife had begun, and now it was already April 1457. Back to half a month ago in the Japanese Empire's capital, Ping in Beijing. Princess Junko, who had returned to the Japanese Empire for 2 years, made use of her strengths and established a school called Xianxia Academy. She widely accepted students and taught advanced knowledge, which was constantly expanding its influence. When Xianxia Academy was first established, it didn't attract much attention. On the contrary, it attracted people's ridicule. In the Japanese Empire, the status of women was naturally subordinate to men. They often believed more than China that a woman without talent was virtuous. It was not surprising that Junko was a princess. Fortunately, Junko's actions received the support of the emperor, who was also his father, the Garden Emperor. There was no other way. His son, Chenin, was only 15 years old, and Junko, who was already 20 years old, naturally became the person that the emperor valued. Speaking of which, the emperor only had a good name, but his life was not easy. In the history of the Japanese Empire, since the end of the Heian period, the emperor, who originally had absolute control over the Japanese Empire, began to lose his power. In 1192 AD, Minamoto no Yoritomo established the Kamakura shogunate, and the emperor began to fall and became a puppet of the Kamakura shogunate. Later in history, the emperor became a puppet of the Muromachi shogunate. The emperor became a puppet of the shogunate for more than 600 years. Not only did he not have any real power, but sometimes even his basic necessities such as food, shelter and transportation and holding ceremonies had problems due to financial constraints. The most typical example was the 103rd generation Emperor Hutu Miyamoto. He was Junko's younger brother. Chapter 1068. Emperor Hutu was born in 1442 AD. His name was Qing Ren, and he was the eldest son of the 102nd emperor of the Chrysanthemum dynasty. His mother was the queen of the emperor of the Chrysanthemum dynasty, Fujiwara. When Emperor Hutu was born, the situation of the imperial court in Kyoto was terrible. First, the real power was in the hands of the Shitachi shogunate, and the emperor was a puppet. Second, the national treasury could not make ends meet, and it was not even enough to pay the salaries of the imperial court officials, let alone meet the expenses of the imperial court. Therefore, even though Emperor Hutu was born in the imperial court, he sometimes did not even have enough food and clothing. Even the wedding ceremony of marrying Princess Tingun was held hastily. In history, the emperor of the Chrysanthemum dynasty abdicated and became the supreme emperor. The 22-year-old Emperor Hutu inherited the throne and became the 103rd emperor of the Chrysanthemum dynasty. Princess Tingtian then became the empress. However, due to the tight financial situation, the imperial court in Kyoto held a very shabby ceremony to save money. Even after he died, because he did not have the money to bury him, his corpse was frozen in the imperial palace for 2 months. Some officials had to raise money to bury him. From this situation, one could imagine the status of the emperor. This was the main reason why they were willing to spend a lot of money to buy the cannons from the 5-star army. It was because the military and political power was controlled by General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. If he did not die, the imperial family would never be able to rise up. However, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's whereabouts were uncertain. No one knew when he went in and out of the general's house. The emperor only bought 1 cannon and 2 bullets from the 5-star army, so he did not dare to take the risk. Since his daughter was willing to come out and do something, the emperor would definitely support her. It was this Xianxia Academy that no one thought highly of. After 2 years of development, they could not recruit any students, but now there were people who were willing to take the initiative to learn. They could not satisfy the 50 students they taught at one time, which attracted the attention of other forces. General Ashikaga Yoshimasa was one of them. First, he sent people to catch the former student. After some investigation, he found that the former student was extraordinarily talented. However, he was just the most ordinary student in the first batch of students in Xianxia Academy, But he had such a great change which attracted the attention of the general. Since she is capable, beautiful and a princess, then let's marry her. General Ashikaga Yoshimasa said to his subordinates. Soon the news that the general wanted to marry Princess Junko spread among the higher-ups. Some abilities should be used. This was the attitude of the strong to the weak. Maybe he wanted Junko to work for him, or maybe he just wanted to marry Junko and throw her at home as a concubine and live a peaceful life. But no matter what the result was, the emperor's power of the emperor. Of course, Junko wouldn't agree to it. She went to the emperor and expressed her determination that she would rather die. How could the emperor did not know his daughters? But what could he? He didn't have much military power and he didn't have any political partners. He couldn't win. Just when the emperor was at his wits' end and Junko was about to commit suicide, a savior appeared. Oda Nagamasa was a powerful general in the capital of Pingan. He was also the only collaborator that the emperor had managed to rope in over the years. He proposed that he could agree to the Supreme General's request, but before the wedding he wanted to meet the Supreme General to discuss some details. The location of the meeting was set at the Supreme General's mansion. The military system of the Japanese Empire was divided from the bottom to the top. It was divided into soldiers, infantry captains in charge of 100 people, infantry captains in charge of 500 people, elders in charge of 1,000 people, generals in charge of 2,000 people, magistrates in charge of 10,000 people, chiefs in charge of 20,000 people, daimyo in charge of 50,000 people, generals in charge of 60,000 to 80,000 people, generals in charge of 60,000 to 80,000 people, and the emperor at the top. Oda Nagamasa was one of the generals with real power under General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He had more than 70,000 soldiers. He came up with this idea to kill the general and replace him. Before, he couldn't find a chance to attack Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Why not use this opportunity to trick him into coming to the general's mansion and then kill him in one fell swoop? In this way, Oda Nagamasa could replace him, and the emperor's power could be restored to a certain extent. This idea was quickly supported by the emperor and Princess Junko. This was their reply to the great general, and the great general agreed without hesitation. There had been news about the imperial family purchasing a cannon from the Five Stars Palace. But after so many years there was no news about it and it gradually faded away. Even General Ashikaga Yoshimasa thought it was fake news. It was precisely because of this that the general politely agreed. He thought that the royal family wanted to save face, so he would give them face. In the future, when Junko became his woman, wouldn't he be able to bully her however he wanted? With a good start, the plan was carried out smoothly. The day before the agreed meeting, the Type 59-1 130mm cannon that he had spent 10 million taels of silver to buy finally took off its disguise after being covered in dust for many years. Furthermore, the only 2 cannonballs were also taken out. In order to ensure that nothing would go wrong, after the first shot was fired, the second shot had to be promptly followed up. The 5-star army had already adjusted the target, and the target was the general's mansion. No one dared to touch it in these years, and now it was finally the time to use it. This matter made the Emperor Junko and Oda Nagamasa become very excited. After a long night of waiting, dawn finally came. When the time of the meeting was getting closer and closer, the emperor and the others held their breath. They were about to witness a miracle, a scene that changed history. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the two sides agreed to meet at the general's mansion. The shell was put into the Type 59-1 130mm cannon, and then a deafening sound was heard. The shell arc across the sky went straight into the general's mansion, causing a shocking feeling like an earthquake. It hit. The soldiers of the Japanese Empire who fired the cannon shouted excitedly, "Isn't there still one more shell? Fire it again." General Oda Nagamasa said excitedly. He was afraid that Ashikaga Yoshimasa wouldn't die. He didn't believe that the general wouldn't die after firing 2 shells. Under the attack of the 2 powerful cannons, the entire general's mansion was covered. Even if the area of the mansion was not small, more than 70% of the area was killed. Especially the main building was destroyed. As long as Ashikaga Yoshimasa stayed in the general's mansion, his fate was almost set in stone. In the imperial palace, you could even see the fire and smoke coming from the general's mansion. This scene made the Emperor Junko and Oda Nagamasa very excited. They were shocked by the power of the cannons, and they were also excited that the situation in the Japanese Empire would soon change. The situation had indeed changed, but the General Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't die. It wasn't because he was smart enough to see through everything. The problem lay with Oda Nagamasa. His most trusted deputy, Kayome Sakuki, suddenly betrayed him and told the supreme shogun about the plan. At the last moment they escaped from the mansion and avoided a fatal disaster. When Oda Nagamasa heard the news, he saw the general's army outside the imperial palace. Fortunately, in order to celebrate the victory and successfully seize military power, Oda Nagamasa had transferred tens of thousands of his own soldiers to guard the palace. Now they were finally put to good use. Hold on. At the same time, Oda Nagamasa was also preparing to break out of the imperial palace. In his view, even if Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't die, Ping and Beijing wasn't a place where he could live for a long time. As for whether he needed to take the emperor and his family with him when he left. Don't be ridiculous, it was already difficult to protect himself, who would think about other things. Oda Nagamasa wanted to escape. Once he left, it could be imagined that the Supreme General's anger would definitely be vented on the emperor. If that was the case, although they might not die, it would be far worse and more painful than death. So leaving the imperial palace was a must. General Oda, please take us with you. The emperor didn't care about his face and lowered his noble head. Yes. Oda Nagamasa wanted to refuse. But Princess Junko said, General, I have a very good relationship with the leader of the 5-star army. As long as you can take us away, I will send someone to contact them and ask for their support to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa. By the way, the leader is my teacher. As if she was afraid that Oda Nagamasa would refuse, Junko added a master and apprentice as a bargaining chip. Everyone in the Japanese Empire knew that the Han people attached great importance to the relationship between master and apprentice. This sentence made Oda Nagamasa, who was about to refuse, change his attitude. He could indeed escape and even take the emperor's family with him. However, if he did so, he would only draw the great general's anger onto himself. With his 70,000 soldiers, there was no way he could stop the great general. So he wanted to keep the emperor and his family to attract the general's attention and anger. But at the same time he knew even more clearly that even if he managed to escape this time, it would be impossible for him to regain his power. It was even very likely that he would become an existence that everyone wanted to kill. He had no idea how long he could last. But now it was completely different. If he could get the help of the 5-star army, the situation would be reversed. If you don't believe it, just look at the power of the 2 cannons. Oda Nagamasa's eyes rolled for a moment. He originally wanted to say sorry, but now he said, yes, the emperor's safety is more important than anything else. I will take you away. Chapter 1069. Later, when the great general's soldiers entered the palace, they had already disappeared. Only the 59 to 130 mm cannon that was still a little warm could be seen at the back of the palace. Take care of this thing, this is the evidence that the 5-star army wants to persecute this great general. I will go back and ask them for an explanation. Great General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's face flashed with anger. There were often ships of the 5-star army near the Wa Island. Usually they also exchanged business, so their relationship was quite good. But this time they wanted to use other people's hands to take his life. This was something he couldn't tolerate. He decided to take advantage of this matter and blackmail the 5-star army. It was clear that the navy of the Japanese Empire also had some strength. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was obviously too arrogant. He thought that the 5-star army would be afraid of him. But he didn't know that at this moment, the 5-star army was mobilizing. The source of all the information came from the head of the security bureau in the Japanese Empire. He said that a civil war was imminent and that they should be prepared. Before the new year, Yang Qindong received the information that the internal relations of the Japanese Empire were tense, and some places had already had internal strife. Since then he had been making all kinds of preparations. Xianxia's powerful machine began to move, the soldiers, provisions and people who wanted to migrate were all moving. Now that there was finally definite news, how could he let go of such an opportunity? Although Yang Qindong didn't know if the emperor's faction would kill the general the day before, in his opinion, no matter who won or lost, it would be beneficial to him. This was a move he was going to make. Ashikaga Yoshimasa took the emperor and some of his confidants and left Ping in Beijing. As he wished, Junko sent her trusted Kobayashi, who was her bodyguard when she was in the Great Ming Dynasty. She asked him to leave the army and get a ship to the nearby North Korea to report to the Five-Star Army for help. After doing this, she followed her imperial father, the empress, her younger brother, and other members of the imperial family to the south under the protection of Oda Nagamasa, and entered the Shanin Road's Anyun area. Shaolin found a boat by the sea and came to North Korea. It was already more than 10 days later when he reported to Yang Chendong. Holding the telegram from North Korea in his hand, he didn't look too surprised. However, the cannon did not kill Ashikaga Yoshimasa. This would make it more difficult for him to conquer the Japanese Empire. Fortunately, he had never thought that such a powerful figure would die so easily, so he had already made sufficient preparations. Yang Chendong put the telegram aside and gave the order to Beta Persei, who was following beside him, "Order Long Way to get ready to depart. We'll sail to Korea in 2 days." With horses they were called Haiki, and without horses they were called Long Way. This was an extremely elite, well-equipped and particularly combat-capable army. They were also the strongest protection around Yang Chendong. Often wherever they appeared, it meant that Yang Chendong would also appear there. There were only 2 days to prepare, but for an elite army the time was more than enough. The reason why Yang Chendong left 2 days to make arrangements was that he wanted to take a good look at his son and daughter. His son Yangbo was still too young. Instead of looking at him, it was better to look at his mother, Hu Yan. He talked about his next itinerary and apologized. As the first madam and Yang Chendong's legal wife, Hu Yan was originally a kind and virtuous woman. Although she was very worried, she didn't blame him at all. Instead, she advised Yang Chendong to be careful. She also said that the next time he came back, little Bo should be able to run all over the place. After leaving Hu Yan's palace, Yang Chendong went to see his daughter Lele. In contrast, she was much cuter. As soon as she saw Yang Chendong, she hugged his neck like a wombat and didn't want to come down. She kept calling him father. Yang Chendong also liked Lele very much. He even specially created a song for her. "The king brought me to patrol the mountains," saying that she was his little princess. Logically speaking, with his current status, it was really degrading for him to touch and play with these songs. But when did he ever put these customs in his eyes? Just based on this matter, it attracted the envy of many people. The attitude of the servants in the palace towards Lele became more friendly and respectful. Xianxia also had many similarities with other dynasties. For example, the people below were also very understanding. Whoever was favored would be more popular. Fortunately, Yang Chendong also treated the other madams very well. At least he did his best to treat them equally. In addition, Hu Yan, as the legal wife of the princess consort, had no intention of suppressing any of her younger sisters. This allowed the palace to appear to be harmonious. Even if there were some disputes, no one would show it on the surface. Whether the backyard was stable or not was directly related to the situation on the front line. Seeing that the backyard was fine, 2 days later, Yang Chendong took the last 1,000 Long Way to leave on the transport ship and went straight to North Korea. At this time, the Japanese Empire had already started a war, especially in the Anyun area. The army sent by the great general Ashikaga Yoshimasa had already fought with Oda Nagamasa's army. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's reason was dignified. He said that someone had kidnapped the royal family and he came to rescue them. Oda Nagamasa was also not incompetent. He held the emperor hostage and ordered his vassals. He said that someone wanted to rebel and he was protecting the emperor. He also asked others to do the same as him, to make their own efforts and contributions to protect the royal family and the emperor. Everyone said that they were right and everyone said that they were righteous. The two groups of people fought together. The other forces of the Japanese Empire that received the news didn't intervene. If they rashly acted without seeing the result, it was very likely that they would become cannon fodder. No one who could become the leader of a force was a fool. When Yang Chendong arrived in North Korea nearly 20 days later, the situation in the Japanese Empire was already very critical. From the feedback of the intelligence department, it was obvious that the great general's side had the advantage. He had always been in charge of the military and political power of the whole country. Oda Nagamasa was just one of the vassals. Naturally, their strength was not equal. It seemed that he couldn't hold on any longer. The governor of North Korea province, Zhang Yi, had already done the logistics work for the army. Some of the people who came here first were also properly settled by him. When the five-star army entered the territory of the Japanese Empire and stood firm, he would immediately send people to make sure that they occupied a place. This was to ensure that they didn't go back and forth and didn't cause extra trouble for the army. Yang Qindong praised Governor Zhang Ye's work. Then he called a group of military generals and pointed at Tsushima Island in the Japanese Empire's terrain on the sand table. He said, "This will be our primary target. Commander Su, I will give this task to your army. Is there any problem?" "I promise to complete the task." The new army's commander, Su He, stood at attention and replied confidently. The new army was an army that had just been established. However, it had been more than a year since the establishment of the army. The personnel structure was already very complete. Especially the commander, Su He, who was originally a general. Since he was captured by Yang Qindong, he had repeatedly made contributions to the army. Under the leadership of such a strong general, the combat power of the new army had been constantly improving. What they lacked now was actual combat experience. It was because of this that Yang Qindong transferred the new army to the front line this time. It was to give them a good opportunity to fight. In Yang Qindong's eyes, the Japanese Empire was not worthy of being called a big enemy. His real enemy was still the grassland. Su He took the position of the vanguard, which made the other division commanders envious. However, they were just envious. No one dared to disobey the orders of the sixth young master. Besides, the Japanese Empire was also one of the big countries. If they wanted to completely occupy this place, they would have to fight a lot of battles. Everyone was ready to fight. After the order was issued, 2 hours after the meeting, a large number of ships belonging to the five-star army began to set off. They set off from Pusan, the southernmost part of North Korea, and went straight to Tsushima Island, which was hundreds of nautical miles away. Tsushima Island belonged to the West Hokkaido area of the Japanese Empire. The chief in charge of guarding this place was called Fukushima Nagashi. He had 20,000 soldiers and nearly 100 warships in his hands. It was a well-known force. Because they fought by the sea all year round, this army was very mobile. If they couldn't win, they could just board the ship and escape to the sea. With this, even the orders of the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa were not completely effective here. Fukushima Nagashi was also paying attention to the Battle of Anyun, but in his view, it was just an internal strife for benefits. To put it bluntly, it was a dog-eat-dog fight. No matter who won in the end, it had nothing to do with him. So during this period of time, his days were very leisurely and he was just a good spectator watching the show. Suddenly, one day, a large number of naval forces flying the flag of the five-star army appeared around Tsushima Island. As soon as they appeared, they surrounded the island in all directions, not leaving a single gap. This situation really scared the Fukushima chief, who had been on the battlefield for a long time. The ones surrounding the island were the C4 and C5 divisions responsible for transporting the new army soldiers. In their eyes, their navy would play a big role in attacking the Japanese Empire. Just like now, no matter who was the vanguard, in the end the navy would be the first to act. Fire the cannons. The two Cold Front Division commanders gave the order almost at the same time. Hundreds of cannons installed in the ships were fired at the Japanese Empire's ships. There were less than 100 ships facing the attack of two elite Cold Front Division commanders. There was no way they could resist. As the ships of the Japanese Empire were sunk or hit, the remaining ships of the Japanese Empire quickly retreated, heading towards the depths of Tsushima Island. It's up to our new army now. Pass down the order, prepare to land. Su He said excitedly. He was afraid that the two Cold Front Division commanders would fire directly into the depths of Tsushima Island. If that happened, he wouldn't live up to his name as the vanguard. Fortunately, these people knew how to endure and gave him the opportunity to attack. Chapter 1070. Speaking of which, why wouldn't the two commanders of the Cold Front Division want to take down Tsushima Island directly? They also have the strength to do so. However, if the cannons were to fire, they would inevitably kill more people of the Japanese Empire. It wasn't that they couldn't bear to do so. This could be seen from the attitude of the sixth young master towards this place. It seemed like the sixth young master had some resentment towards this place. The reason why they didn't fire the cannons was because they wanted to give the new army a chance to train their soldiers. At the same time, they could also save some cannons. After all, every cannons fired were worth a lot of money. So far, the production rate of cannons was still very low. Moreover, from time to time, substandard products would appear. Cannons had become a very precious item in the army. The soldiers of the new army couldn't wait any longer. As soon as the ship docked, they rushed towards the island like madmen. After losing the ship, Fukushima Nagamasa's combat strength had decreased by more than half. Quick, release the smoke, call for reinforcements. Fukushima Nagamasa, who was forced to retreat back to the island, heard from his subordinates that countless five-star troops had already begun to disembark and fight. Immediately he was scared out of his wits and screamed in horror. Calling for reinforcements was something he learned from Wuxia. At the time when there was no telecommunications, this method was still somewhat effective. At least, it notified others that there was a foreign invasion on Tsushima Island. However, it was a pity that the five-star army had been planning for a long time. How could they give them any time to breathe? He and his comrades didn't know how many times they had dreamt that they would appear in the Japanese Empire and start a massacre. Now their dreams had finally come true. Yang Qindong's order was to show no mercy. Anyone who resisted would be killed without mercy. It's just a small island nation. How dare they overestimate themselves and spy on Wuxia? How dare they try to swallow an elephant? Now was the time to deal with them. There was no need to be soft-hearted or have any scruples. This was because he was giving them a taste of their own medicine. Moreover, he was paying them back 100 times. The new army entered Tsushima Island in a mighty manner. The 4 cavalry divisions mounted their horses and launched a fierce attack. In front of Fukushima Nagashi's army, which did not possess any firearms, not even the most primitive firearms, the appearance of more than 30,000 cavalrymen was like a tide of beasts, instantly drowning them. The frontmost Japanese army was forced to retreat, suffering heavy casualties. Cavalry had a natural advantage over infantrymen. They were both using cold weapons, but they were destined not to be opponents of the same level. There would only be one result in this clash. The cavalry would slaughter in all directions, and the infantry would be defeated like a mountain. It was the first time for many of the new army soldiers to go to the battlefield, but each of them had undergone at least half a year of hard training before coming here. They had long memorized the things that they should pay attention to. Right now, they were just performing at the level that they had been training for. Facing the Japanese army that had no fighting spirit and only knew how to continuously retreat, even if they were a little flustered, they quickly got used to it. After all, it was the easiest to fight a battle where the wind was blowing. This was the reason why Yang Qindong sent the new army for the first battle. In contrast, the new army had the least amount of combat experience among the 150,000 soldiers he brought with him. This was a chance for them to make up for their shortcomings. It was true that the new army was a new army, but their combat strength was not the weakest. They had been training for a long time, and each soldier carried the hope and future of their family. Compared to the Yishi and Yishi, their fighting spirit was much stronger. After the victory of the first battle, the new army's morale was high. They lined up on the island and waited for Yang Qindong to inspect them. It was said that morale was built through fighting. The situation on the battlefield was one-sided. The new Third Army had only won a big victory, but it was as if they had been reborn. Many of the new soldiers had successfully accepted the baptism of the battlefield and completed the transformation from new soldiers to veterans. The opponent in this battle was only 20,000 people, and they were not well prepared. Victory is deserved. This was the first sentence that Commander Su He said after seeing Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong nodded approvingly and said, "Very good. Since that's the case, I'll give you another chance to perform. Next, the new Third Army will cooperate with the other divisions to take down all the territories of the West Sea Road. Are you confident?" "Yes." Su He just answered instinctively, but then he realized what Yang Qindong meant. He couldn't help but widen his eyes and said, "Don't we have to go to the Anyun area first? Princess Junko and the Emperor of the Japanese Empire are there." The Anyun area was in the Shanin area. From Tsushima Island they needed to go north. The West Sea Road was in the east of Tsushima Island. This was a completely different direction. It was no wonder that Su He was so surprised. "No need. Everything is going according to plan." Yang Qindong had no intention to explain. Or rather, he didn't want to explain anything at all. Only he knew the real reason. He wanted to take advantage of this internal strife to take over the entire Japanese empire. Not only that, he didn't want to take over the Japanese royal family. What a joke. He was going to rule this place in the future. If he left the royal family behind, wouldn't he be tying his hands and feet? Although he could keep the king like the other destroyed forces and countries, he didn't have such thoughts about one nation at all. He hoped that these people would die as soon as possible, so that it would be easier for him to carry out some of his work and plans in one nation. These were just selfish motives. It wasn't something that could be shown in public. On the surface he had enough reasons. That was, Oda Nagamasa's troops in the Anyun area couldn't hold on under the attack of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's army. Even if the 5-star army rushed over at full speed, it would still be too late. Since that was the case, it was better to take over the West Sea Road first and let the 5-star army gain a firm foothold. With enough reasons, and the plan was proposed by Yang Qindong, how could the other generals have any objections? What they wanted was nothing more than military exploits and killing enemies on the battlefield to temper themselves. As for where to attack first and where to attack later, they just needed to follow orders. Therefore, after the first battle of capturing Tsushima Island, the 5-star army didn't go north as some of the so-called military strategists of the Japanese Empire expected. Instead, they suddenly went east and entered West Sea Road. Not only did this greatly surprise some people, but it also caught the Japanese army by surprise. Anyun area. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was facing the tenacious resistance of Oda Nagamasa. In addition, he received the news that the 5-star army suddenly launched an attack on Tsushima Island. He felt that something bad was going to happen, so he accelerated the attack. In the name of the Supreme General, he mobilized troops from all over the country to launch a fierce siege. For a time, Oda Nagamasa's troops suffered heavy losses and were in imminent danger. Junko was in a small courtyard assigned to her, and her face was full of anxiety. She also heard the news that the 5-star army appeared on Tsushima Island. She wasn't angry about the sudden invasion of an alien race. Instead, she was somewhat happy. According to the time, Kobayashi should have just arrived in North Korea not long ago. Didn't this mean that he still had her in his heart? While she was happy in her heart, she was also worried. Junko didn't know if he could really save her. After all, from the current situation, this place was already very dangerous. Once Ashikaga Yoshimasa attacked this place first, she, the Emperor Empress, and her brother would be forced to become hostages. They might even have to live a life worse than before. At that time, even if he wanted to attack, he should have some scruples. Junko had to say that she was thinking too much. You Japanese Empire people are holding your own emperor to threaten who? Yang Qindong is just an outsider. Why would he be afraid of such a threat? Once a woman fell in love, her IQ would also drop. Junko was like this. She optimistically thought that the 5-star army came to save her. While she was looking forward to it, another woman appeared beside her, temporarily breaking this unrealistic idea. Princess. The woman who appeared beside Junko was good-looking, especially with a very graceful figure. Yoshiko, why are you here? Junko looked at the woman who came to her side and asked with a smile. She knew this woman. Her name was Yoshiko, and she was a geisha in the royal family. With her good dancing and perfect figure, she attracted the emperor's interest. After being introduced to her, she was specially invited to the palace. Because they were about the same age, they quickly became familiar with each other. Many times, Junko even thought that she and Yoshiko had more in common, which also made the relationship between the two sides much closer. Usually, Yoshiko would find time to chat with Junko. Although one was a princess and the other was a geisha, the current royal family was so weak that there was no particularly obvious concept of hierarchy, so the two sides talked happily. Seeing Yoshiko appear, Junko thought that she was afraid and wanted to talk to her to reduce her fear. So after greeting her, Junko said with a smile, "Well, you don't have to worry. This princess tells you that the 5-star army is here, and I believe that it won't take long for them to arrive here. At that time we will be safe." Seeing Junko's yearning look, Yoshiko interrupted her fantasy and said in fluent Japanese, "I'm afraid that the 5-star army won't be able to save the princess." Wait, what are you saying? Junko looked at the usually petite Yoshiko who suddenly said such words, and her tone was so confident. For a moment, Junko was stunned and asked as if she didn't know Yoshiko. "I said that the 5-star army won't be able to save the princess." Yoshiko opened her mouth again. But this time she didn't say it in Japanese but in very standard Chinese. Junko's face was full of surprise and she pointed at Yoshiko and said, "You, how can you speak Chinese?" Chapter 1071. In the Japanese Empire, although it could be said that they were separated from the Han people, Qin Shi Huang sent Su Fu to bring 500 boys and girls to Japan, and that was how the Japanese Empire came to be. This saying was not only in the Ming dynasty but also in the Japanese Empire. However, there were very few people in the Japanese Empire who could speak Chinese. After all, this was an island country and without many opportunities to interact with the outside world, this foreign language was really not very useful. That was why Junko was so surprised. In fact, after she returned to the country, other than the captain of the guards, Kobayashi, this was the first person who spoke Chinese to her. Junko was still surprised and Tomiko opened her mouth again. "Because I am a Han person, I can naturally speak Chinese. Not only that, but I was also sent by the 6th young master to protect the princess. Oh, by the way, this is a token. I believe the princess will believe me when she sees it." Tomiko took out a portrait and it was a portrait of Junko and it was Junko wearing a Ming dynasty uniform. Judging from the clothes she was wearing, it should be the clothes and appearance she wore when she was studying in the Yang Family Academy. Looking at the portrait in her hand, it seemed as if she was thinking of the happy times she had in the Yang Family Academy. It was impossible for someone without that kind of experience to draw such a picture. Junko raised her head again. At this moment she already believed that Tomiko was sent by him, but she was still a little curious about the purpose of Tomiko's appearance. You are not from the Japanese Empire and you are not a geisha. What is your identity?" "The princess is right, I am not a geisha. That is just a way to hide my identity and make you accept me. My real identity is the intelligence director of the CIA stationed in the Japanese Empire. As for the name Tomiko, it sounds very nice, I like it very much." When it was time to show her cards, Tomiko said without hesitation. Revealing her identity was just the beginning, and it was just for the next plan. If she couldn't gain Junko's trust, it would be difficult to carry out the next many tasks. Tomiko's honesty won Junko's favor. More importantly, she knew that all the arrangements were made by Yang Chendong, which was enough to prove that he still cared about her. Especially when she thought that Tomiko's appearance meant that she and her father would be safer. She said happily, "Since that's the case, are you here to save you?" "Yes, the princess is right. But that's not entirely correct. I only want to save the princess, not all of you." Tomiko's expression returned to indifference, as if she had taken the lead from this moment on. "Save me? It's just me." "Yes." Tomiko nodded again. "That won't do. If you want to save them, you have to save my father, mother and brother as well," Junko said stubbornly. "Impossible." Tomiko shook her head. "With my ability, I can only escape with the princess. As for the Emperor, Empress and Prince Chen, they will be fine. No matter who has the advantage in the end, their safety should be guaranteed. At most, the environment will be a little bad. But as long as the princess can see the 6th young master and ask for his permission, it is only a matter of time before they are saved." Tomiko had her own mission, and now that she was surrounded by enemies, she didn't have the ability to save more people. She was able to take Junko away because she had done a lot of preparation before, so she had the confidence to do so. Junko, who originally wanted to continue to refuse, fell into deep thought. Of course, she knew that Tomiko's words were reasonable, but she still couldn't bear to let her leave her father, mother and brother like this. "Princess, as long as you stay by the 6th young master's side and urge him all the time, it will be possible for the 5-star army to complete the rescue mission. Otherwise, without help, who do you think will be so active?" Tomiko thought of Yang Chendong's instructions before she left, so she followed his words. This sentence finally had an effect. Yang Chendong knew Junko well and Tomiko's words also had an effect, so Junko nodded and agreed. "Okay, I promise you, but I have to say goodbye to my father, mother and brother." "Hey, but please be quick. Gongzi still has more than 2 hours and we will leave here at night." Tomiko agreed. This was something she had prepared for a long time. With her understanding of Junko, some things must be done. Junko went to see her father, who was also the 102nd emperor of the Japanese Empire, Emperor Hirito of the Garden. After seeing her father, Junko didn't hide anything and told him that Yang Chendong sent people to save her. Father, you have suffered, but as long as you hold on for a while, I will definitely persuade him to send troops quickly and save you. Junko's words also frightened Emperor Hiruto. He didn't expect that he only stayed because he saw Tomiko's good dancing skills, and this coincidence was actually arranged by him in advance. He really didn't know what that person didn't know. Because of this, he also had a sense of fear. Once this kind of smart person had an idea about the Japanese Empire, would he allow him to continue to exist? He was already an obstacle on the other side's way. The best way to deal with an obstacle was to kick it aside or even eliminate it directly. Since this Bugnam of Gojoseon of the Great Ming Dynasty had calculated everything, how could he not see this step? So wouldn't he be in danger? Emperor Hiruto really wanted to tell this matter to his daughter, but he still held back. Since his daughter liked that man very much, then he would let her obtain her own happiness. There were some words that would only hurt feelings if spoken out loud. And most importantly, with his daughter as a link, even if the Japanese Empire was heavily damaged by the five-star army in the future, as a father he could more or less benefit from it. Thinking of this for his own benefit, Emperor Hiruto said, "Father can see that he likes you very much. Since that's the case, then be with him and then use his power to promote the power of our emperor, and benefit the people of the Japanese Empire." Her father agreed, and he was still so supportive of her. Junko's face was filled with joy. "Yes, father, Junko promises you." When she said this, there was a trace of shyness on Junko's face, but she did not know that this was the last time she saw her father. Everything that happened after that was completely unexpected. When Yang Qindong received the news that the emperor of the harem was killed, he was also surprised. After all, Yang Qindong did not really want to kill this person, even if it was for Junko's sake. He just wanted to use this war to completely weaken the influence of the imperial family on the Japanese Empire. Unlike the leaders of other occupied countries and regions, they would quietly hide people and tell others that they were dead, so as to cut off some people's thoughts, and let them live a peaceful life in private. But often plans were not as fast as changes. Back to the present. With her father's consent and blessing, Junko quietly left the compound with Tomiko when it was dark. Tomiko had already prepared for all of this. First, she got 2 sets of men's clothes, and with the help of some things, the 2 beauties quickly became 2 middle-aged Japanese Empire men. Then, under the cover of night and the protection of the CIA in the dark, they left the Anyun area. In order not to be discovered, Tomiko even found a woman who looked similar to Princess Junko. She spent a lot of money to find this woman from the Japanese Empire in order to delay the discovery of the princess's disappearance. The plan went smoothly. Junko was just a girl. In the eyes of Oda Nagamasa, her status was far less important than the emperor and his son, Prince Seiji. She was even less important than Empress Tengra. Junko, who was just a marginal figure, successfully left. Under the unified plan of Yang Qindong, the 5-star army didn't attack the Mountain Sun Path. Instead, they suddenly attacked the West Sea Path. The Chikuhu area, Feiho area, Oyu area, and Fengho area were successively attacked by the 150,000 5-star army in multiple ways. Faced with either long guns, short cannons, armored cavalry, elite soldiers, or a sea of soldiers, the defenseless West Sea Path quickly fell. Finally, the army gathered in the Fengqian area, which was the border between the West Sea Path and the Mountain Sun Path, and it only took 13 days. In 10 days they took down one of the 7 major areas of Wen Nation. Of course, it was because they were caught off guard. It was also because the West Sea Road was on the edge of the Wen Nation, so the defense force was weak. But it also proved the strength of the 5-star army. After 13 days, the 5-star army gathered again and prepared to attack the Mountain Sun Path and Nagato area from the Fengqian area. The various armies, divisions and regiments quickly gathered. Behind them, the 500,000 Han people and other foreigners from the Korean province were already in place. They were occupying and digesting the entire West Sea Path. At the same time, some of the Japanese Empire's citizens in the West Sea Path were also forced to board the 5-star army's transport ships. They were going to leave this place and go to other provinces under the Xianxia's control. For them, many of them might not be able to return to this place for the rest of their lives. The 5-star army obviously came prepared. However, the Japanese Empire's General Ashikaga Yoshimasa wasn't an idiot. After 13 days under his fierce attack, Oda Nagamasa was finally defeated. He died and some of his soldiers were killed. Most of them surrendered and became captives. This included the emperor, his empress and his son, Prince Naruhito. The only regret was that Junko was missing. They only found a girl who looked like her. But it was only a girl who went missing. For the Japanese Empire, who valued boys over girls, it wasn't a big deal. Chapter 1072. The most important thing was that the Emperor of Japan was now in his hands again. General Ashikaga Yoshimasa was very happy. He sent Kayome Sakuki to bring the Emperor of Japan and his family back to the palace in Ping and Beijing. After that, he began to gather more people to prepare for the battle with the Five-Star Army. At the same time, he also wanted to see what reason Yang Qindong would use to start a war in the Japanese Empire if he couldn't save the Emperor of Japan. He could even see that Yang Qindong had no choice but to retreat. He was even prepared to beat the dog while it was down and take the opportunity to ask for compensation and other demands. The Japanese Empire was an independent island country. It had a large army and a strong navy. It wasn't like other small countries that could be destroyed easily. Their territory wasn't small and they had a large population. If they wanted to escape, they could hide anywhere in the ocean. Even if they couldn't win, they could still escape. They could find an opportunity to come back and take revenge. This was where his confidence came from. It was also why he didn't show any signs of cowardice when facing the Five-Star Army. All these years, Ashikaga Yoshimasa had been in charge of the military and political power. This made his influence very large. Although some of the counties and villages under him had started to have internal strife for benefits. However, the appearance of the Five-Star Army put an end to this situation. When facing an external enemy, the people of the Japanese Empire were still able to grasp the situation clearly. They began to unite around the Japanese Empire's upper echelons with the general as the core. According to the information from the front lines, the Japanese army in the Sanyang Road had a total of 400,000 people. It was nearly 3 times the number of people of the Five-Star Army. In addition, the enemy was familiar with the environment and had sufficient provisions. A tough battle was unavoidable. If it was other forces facing such difficulties, they would have a headache. They would have to consider whether or not it was the right decision to send troops this time. However, in the eyes of Yang Qindong and the Five-Star Army, this was nothing. They were used to fighting against the wind. Wasn't the Five-Star Army developed like this? Looking at the history of the Five-Star Army's growth, which time did they not win against the many? Which time did they not give people the feeling that they were the weak? It was just a Japanese empire. For the generals of the Five-Star Army who had experienced hundreds of battles, this was nothing. Just like now, in Yang Qindong's tent, 1st Cavalry Division Commander Tian Hu, new Army Commander Su He, C4 Division Commander Ding Yen, and C5 Division Commander He Gong were standing in a row, taking the initiative to ask for battle. The more difficult the battle was, the more one could prove one's ability by winning. When they saw that the Japanese Empire had deployed 400,000 soldiers, they all saw an opportunity. Division Commander Ding, Division Commander He can forget about it. Using the Navy as an army is an arrangement that can only be made when there is no other way. Yang Qindong opened his mouth and directly removed the C Division 4 and C Division 5 from the team. 6th Young Master We. The 2 teachers were still indignant and wanted to continue fighting. What? Do you know that the Japanese Empire has 300,000 soldiers? Your 2 divisions added together only have 10,000 soldiers. Isn't such a big piece of meat enough for you to chew on? Seeing that the 2 teachers still wanted to say something, Yang Qindong's words suppressed them and made them unable to argue. But in the blink of an eye, the 2 teachers heard something different. 6th Young Master, are you saying that the 300,000 Japanese Naval Division will be dealt with by our C Division 4 and C Division 5? The one who asked this question was the C Division 4 Division Commander Ding Yen. In response, Yang Qindong rolled his eyes and said, "Not only you, there are also 20,000 North Korean Navy. They will be under your command and cooperate with the operation. Of course, if it turns out that you can't suppress the Japanese Naval Division, then this young master will have to consider transferring people from the Navy Command Headquarters." No need, we have no problem. The C Division 4 Division Commander Ding Yen immediately waved his hand, as if he could just leave it to them. Yes, 6th Young Master, we are willing to make a military pledge. The C Division 5 Division Commander said seriously. Yes, we are willing to make a military pledge. The C Division commander Ding Yan also reacted and immediately stood at attention. Yang Qindong waved his hand and didn't ask them to make a military pledge because he believed that these two teachers would do their best to prove themselves. Besides, the C Division 4 and C Division 5 division were fully equipped with firearms and had experienced many battles. They could be called elite soldiers. If they still couldn't deal with the Japanese Naval Division, then he really had to consider whether these two were qualified for their current positions. After the two teachers left, there was still a commander and a division commander standing in front of him. Facing their eager eyes, Yang Qindong still refused and said, "I know what you mean, but this time you can't take the lead. Leave it to the foreign races. They also need to be sharpened." Yang Qindong's words blocked the mouths of Tianhu and Su He. The two of them also knew that the sixth young master was doing this for their own good. Besides, the Japanese Empire didn't only have 400,000 soldiers in front of them. There would be many more opportunities to fight big battles in the future. The two of them didn't say anything else and left the tent. After sending away the four generals, Yang Qindong called the three division commanders of the Wuxia Division, the Wuxia Division and the Wuxia Division. He told them that the next task of attacking the Mountain Sun Path would be given to them. Looking at the three division commanders Niu Duo, Tu Hai and Luan Xiaojiang, the sixth young master said sincerely, "This is your chance to show off. Just do it. If you all die, this young master will replace you." Yang Qindong had always cherished the lives of his soldiers. Sometimes, in order to reduce the number of casualties, he would personally charge into the enemy lines. However, Yang Qindong always had a different view of the foreign races. This was an army formed for benefits, for the sake of standing out and for the sake of a better future. Their starting point wasn't necessarily honorable. They didn't even have a sense of identity with him. Many of them had fallen because of him. If an army like this was too strong, who knew if it would become a gunpowder barrel at any time and blow him up? For people with such experiences, if they could die on the battlefield, it would be a good ending. It would dispel Yang Qindong's worries about them, and it would also ensure that the territory under Xia's rule would be more stable and harmonious. Of course, although these people had impure intentions from a righteous point of view, they were fighting for him and for the five-star army. Therefore, Yang Qindong was still willing to give them a chance. He wanted them to perform well on the battlefield. If they were really capable, he believed that they would shine brightly. However, most people wouldn't be so lucky. Yang Qindong made a promise in front of the three division commanders. He also said that more foreign races were gathering in Korea. It wouldn't be long before they arrived at the Japanese Empire and joined the battle. In other words, no matter how the battle was, their positions as division commanders wouldn't be shaken. Even if they were all killed, they could quickly rebuild. With this promise, Niu Duo and the other two had nothing to be afraid of. In front of Yang Qindong, they said that they would do their best to inflict more damage to the Japanese army and show that the five-star army wasn't afraid of death and hardships. Beta Persei, who was standing on the side, heard all the conversation. When Niu Duo and the other two left with excited faces, he finally couldn't help but ask, "Young master, with just these three divisions, I'm afraid they won't be a match for the 400,000 troops of the Japanese Empire." Who said they were a match? Listening to such a short but straightforward answer, Beta Persei was stunned. Seeing that Beta Persei didn't speak, Yang Qindong smiled and said, "What? Are you very suspicious?" Since they knew that they were no match for them, why would they send these three foreign divisions to die on the battlefield? Yes. Beta Persei did think so in his heart, but there were some things that he couldn't ask. He didn't even think that the young master would really answer him. Yang Qindong still answered, "The time isn't right. We are invading for no reason now. We don't have enough reason. It's okay to fight a smooth battle, but once the situation is not good, then problems may arise at any time, so we still need to wait." As for what they were waiting for, Yang Qindong didn't say it clearly, and Beta Persei naturally didn't ask more. Of course, he didn't know that Yang Qindong had another idea, and that was the army of the Japanese Empire. Especially their samurai army and ninja army, their strength couldn't be underestimated. Yang Qindong would value people with ability. He still had a great dream to achieve. Of course, unifying the Asian region was not his goal. Now, unifying the Asian region and integrating the energy here to make sufficient preparations to attack other regions was what he wanted. If the main elite force was sent out at once, The casualties on both sides would not be small. This was not what he wanted to see. What he wanted was more captives, more people who could be used by him. Naturally, the timing was also very important. Next, Yang Qindong asked Beta Persei to find the captain of the Wolf Fang Special Forces, Tai Hu. Some of the following things needed to be done secretly. For example, the 3 foreign divisions were the vanguard. That was a battle on the surface, but in the dark they needed the powerful Wolf Fang to take action. No one knew what Yang Qindong talked to Tai Hu about. They only knew that after an hour the captain left. Soon after, teams of Wolf Fang were sent out in different directions to various parts of the Japanese Empire. Ishikami District, under the jurisdiction of the Japanese Empire's Shanin Province, adjacent to the Shanyang Province's Anyun District. In a small town called Zhongda in Ishikami District, 2 young men were squatting under the eaves of a very ordinary house, each holding a broken bowl, and begging the pedestrians along the street. Under their ragged clothes, the backs of the 2 people looked a little thin and pitiful. There were rich people in every area and naturally there were poor people. Beggars could be seen everywhere in Zhongda city, which was not rich. These 2 little beggars didn't attract any attention. Even when the patrolling soldiers on the street passed by them, they would never give them a second glance. Chapter 1073. Thus, the 2 beggars stayed on the main street in an ostentatious manner. Of course, no one would know that they were the princess of the Japanese Empire, Junko, and the manager of the CIA in the Japanese Empire, Yoshiko, who had escaped from the Anyun area. Under the secret protection of the CIA operatives, the 2 of them walked out of the Anyun area and came to the neighboring Zhongda city. They came to a place that had been prepared for a long time. But what was unexpected was that because the 5-star army only took 13 days to conquer the entire West Sea Road, it caused the Japanese army in other areas to be nervous. They increased the intensity of their patrols, and for any foreigners who suddenly appeared for any reason, they would strictly investigate them, fearing that they were spies sent by the 5-star army. Because of this, the previous safe place could no longer be used. And in order to not attract attention and not have any accidents during the investigation, Yoshiko suggested that they disguise themselves as beggars to avoid all the dangers. After all, Junko was a princess of a country. Even when she was in the capital of Baiming, no one wronged her. But now in her own country she had to disguise herself as a beggar that everyone avoided, so she had some complaints. But Yoshiko said, if you want to take revenge and successfully see the 6th young master, you can only do this. Otherwise, you will be taken away and become one of the threats to the 6th young master. At that time, not only would it be difficult to take revenge, but her life would also be in danger. After weighing the pros and cons, Junko agreed. Now she stretched out her small hands and squatted on the street with Yoshiko. The 2 squatted together, paying attention to the pedestrians on the street. When they found that no one was staring at them, Junko whispered, "We have been begging here for 10 days. When will it end? Will sensei really send someone to pick us up? Why do I feel that I am getting more and more used to my current role?" Hearing Junko's complaint, Yoshiko's expression didn't change. Instead, she explained very patiently, "Don't worry, the news has already been spread. The 6th young master will definitely not ignore it. Maybe it won't be long before the people who will save us appear. All we have to do now is wait patiently." Tomiko didn't want to dress up as a beggar, but she had no choice. There were only 6 CIA operatives around them. Once they were discovered, they would be in a very dangerous situation. They had no choice but to do so. However, Tomiko was willing to accept all of this. She had already found out through some channels that the 6th young master was very good to Tomiko. Although it was said to be a teacher-student relationship, it was naturally different from an ordinary teacher-student relationship. This could be seen from the fact that the 6th young master had led troops to appear when the civil strife in Neon had not ended yet. Tomiko also heard that the 6th young master seemed to have a good impression of this foreign princess. What's more, some people said that the 6th young master once had the idea of marrying Tomiko. If all of this was true, then wouldn't her future be infinitely bright since she and Junko had gone through thick and thin together? Because of this, Tomiko was very patient with Junko. Even if they both became beggars, she didn't show the slightest resentment or dissatisfaction. Listening to Tomiko's answer, she thought that even an outsider could accompany her. What else could she be dissatisfied with? What else could she complain about? At that moment she stretched out her dirty little hand again as if she was going to order a meal. Time passed day by day. 2 days later. The two women were walking on the streets of Zhongda City, looking for a place to hide today. Suddenly an accident happened. A gust of wind suddenly blew. Caught off guard, the two women were blown by the wind. Their clothes were blown by the wind, and the broken hat on their head was blown away, revealing their beautiful black hair. At this time a group of 30 Japanese Empire patrols passed by and saw this scene. After the wind passed, the two women were surrounded. "Who are you?" The leader of the Japanese Empire squad asked in Japanese. We are refugees. Because we encountered bandits, our families were all killed. We sisters have no choice but to live on the streets. Facing the approaching patrols of the Japanese Empire, Tomiko stood up. From the initial panic to calmness, it only took her a breath or two. There shouldn't be any problem with this answer. The only problem was that they were two women and their figures were quite good. Although their faces were covered with ashes and it was impossible to see their faces, they were young and had a good figure. Didn't they see that the patrols of the Japanese Empire had evil smiles on their faces? Oh my, it's actually two women. And bring them back to the barracks and investigate their origins. The patrol leader said with a lewd look. His eyes had already looked up and down at Tomiko and Tomiko several times. Obviously, bringing them back for investigation was fake, and it was likely that they were doing something improper. Not only did the two women understand this, but even the people of the Japanese Empire who were watching on the streets understood this. It was just that on one side were 30 well-trained soldiers of the Japanese Empire, and on the other side were two women who they didn't know at all. Who would stand up for them? The people seemed to know what was going to happen next. One by one they turned around and left. They were afraid that if they stayed any longer they would be implicated and taken away. This made the soldiers of the Japanese Empire even more daring. In broad daylight they surrounded them and were ready to take action. Tomiko was already trembling with nervousness. It was true that she was the princess of the Wen nation. Even if the royal family was in decline, she was still a princess. No one would do anything to her so blatantly. It was the first time she had encountered such a situation. What should she do? What should she do? She also didn't know what to do. She could only tightly grab Tomiko's arm and curl her body into a ball. Tomiko's situation wasn't much better. She was assigned to work in the Japanese Empire after professional training. She was already prepared to encounter danger and even sacrifice her life. But the problem was that she wasn't the only one in danger. The princess was next to her. If it were her, she might have pretended to be obedient. In order to survive, she didn't mind accompanying these stinky men. As a female intelligence agent, she was already mentally prepared for this kind of thing. Something could happen to her, but Tomiko couldn't. She was the person who the sixth young master wanted. Something happened to her. How was she going to explain it to her superiors? How was the entire CIA going to explain it to the sixth young master? She couldn't avoid it, and she couldn't avoid it. Tomiko made up her mind. She bit her lip and suddenly raised her right leg to kick the patrol captain who was closest to her. To be able to enter the CIA, even a woman had to go through some military training to ensure that she had the ability to protect herself in a critical moment. Tomiko made her move. She kicked the opponent's crotch. The opponent gritted his teeth and sucked in a cold breath. His face was very ugly. It was obvious how serious the consequences were. For a moment, the other patrol soldiers were frozen in place. Obviously, they didn't expect that the two weak women would dare to fight back when surrounded by fierce soldiers. Could it be that they weren't as simple as ordinary beggars? Take them back. Another deputy captain was the first to come back to his senses. He took over the captain's position and gave the order. More than 20 patrolling soldiers agreed and prepared to besiege them. Then an accident happened. An arrow suddenly pierced through the air and hit the back of a Japanese Empire patrol soldier. The powerful force directly penetrated the soldier's body. Plop. The Japanese Empire soldier who fell to the ground still had a pained expression on his face. His mouth opened and closed as if he wanted to say something. Obviously, he wasn't completely dead yet. This scene also shocked the other Japanese Empire patrol soldiers. They pulled out their swords and stood back to back, guarding against any danger that might appear at any time and the arrows that might come out of nowhere. This situation lasted for 7 or 8 breaths of time. When they didn't see any more people or danger, The captain who had been kicked in the crotch had almost recovered. At least he was able to speak. Take these 2 people back. If they resist, I don't care if they live or die. One soldier had already died. The captain was really angry and made up his mind. The 2 Japanese Empire patrol soldiers who received the order came forward. They wanted to reach out and grab Tomiko and Tomiko. At this moment, the arrows that had disappeared earlier appeared again. However, because they were prepared, not only did they not hit anyone but they also exposed their position. They were discovered by the Japanese Empire soldiers who were watching their surroundings. Then they swarmed forward to capture them. There were only 6 CIA operatives around Tomiko. They were only responsible for providing cover. They weren't the best at fighting. With 6 people against 30 people, they were obviously outnumbered. In a short period of time, the 6 people who showed their heads were surrounded. One of them had already been cut down and died after being stabbed several times. The situation was very dangerous. There was no way these 6 people could protect themselves. Tomiko anxiously turned around and looked at Tomiko. It seemed as if she was asking for something. Tomiko understood. Tomiko wanted her to reveal her identity. However, she didn't think this would work. Her identity might be useful against people with status. However, to ordinary Japanese Empire soldiers, she was no threat at all. The difference in status between the 2 sides was too great. Not only that, but she might also bring shame to the imperial family by revealing her identity. Once her identity as a princess was exposed and she was blasphemed by ordinary Japanese Empire soldiers, she wouldn't be able to rest in peace even if she died. Tomiko shook her head and refused Tomiko's suggestion to reveal her identity. "Hey, then let's die together. At least we can be companions on the road to the afterlife." Tomiko's voice was a little sad. Then she became determined. When she came to carry out the mission, she had mentally prepared herself for this. Now that she was willing to die to protect Tomiko, she was sure that the 6th young master would treat her family well. It could be considered a worthy death. Chapter 1074. Let's fight. The broken bowl in Tomiko's hand flew out as she got into a fighting stance. She was determined to die to repay the kindness of the 6th young master and the 5th Madame Sumanair. Tomiko also threw the broken bowl in her hand. When she was in the Yang Family Academy, she did a lot of physical training. Although she didn't learn properly, she still had some strength. At this moment, she also had the idea of dying together with the enemy. She clenched her fists tightly. "They're rebelling. Catch them. I want them to pay for all the torture." When the captain saw that the 2 women dared to clamor in front of him, he was furious. He had already decided to teach them a lesson. Even if the 2 of them died, he wouldn't let go of their corpses. The captain's eyes revealed a fierce look. All of this was seen by Tomiko and Tomiko. At the same time, they were also prepared to die. Not far away, only 2 of the 6 CIA operatives were left. One of them was seriously injured and looked like they were about to be wiped out. Tomiko, who had lost all hope, looked in the direction of Deming. At this moment, only Yang Qindong's handsome face flashed in her mind. Perhaps the only thing she did wrong was not staying by his side. Kill. Several Japanese Empire patrol soldiers took the lead. In order to prevent themselves from being taken advantage of, each of them even held a battle sword. They looked like they would really kill the 2 women if they didn't cooperate. With a shout, 2 Japanese Empire soldiers took the lead and rushed forward. 5 steps, 3 steps. They were getting closer and closer to Tomiko and Tomiko. The 2 women gritted their teeth and took a deep breath, preparing to meet the attack head-on. However, at this moment, the sound of air being pierced was heard again. Arrows were shot from afar and accurately hit the chests of the 2 Japanese Empire soldiers. The powerful force directly caused the 2 to scream and fall to the ground. The sudden change also stunned the other Japanese Empire soldiers. They didn't know what to do. "Don't be afraid, we're here." With a shout, a tall and big King Kong appeared. Behind him and beside him were 30 Langya Special Forces members. In order not to attract attention, King Kong did not take a gun. Instead, he took a crossbow that was specially used by the Special Forces. This crossbow had a shooting range of 150 steps. At that time, it was already one of the most powerful cold weapons. The moment King Kong appeared, he fired the first arrow. The Special Forces members that he had brought with him also started firing their crossbows. For a moment, the sounds of arrows whizzing through the air could be heard incessantly. One after another, the patrolling soldiers of the Japanese Empire were shot and fell to the ground dead. With the same number of people, the difference in combat power was like heaven and earth, bringing about different results. Retreat. Seeing the surrounding soldiers fall one by one, the patrol leader knew that things were not going well. He turned around and ran, wanting to go back and report. But just as he turned around, 2 arrows shot through his body at almost the same time, causing him to fall to the ground under the powerful inertia. With the captain dead, the rest of the soldiers were nothing to be afraid of. Just the arrows alone were enough to kill them. From the beginning to the end, the Xianxia Special Forces members did not have the slightest bit of close contact with the patrolling soldiers of the Japanese Empire. The outcome of the battle had been decided. In the blink of an eye, 30 patrolling soldiers were all dead. However, the remaining 2 members of the CIA operation team were safe and sound. This accurate archery shocked Junko. It also scared some of the brave citizens of the Japanese Empire who were watching the battle not far away. "Captain, do you want to kill them all?" Seeing that some of the citizens who were watching the battle had already screamed and fled in all directions, some of the team members were worried that they would go and report to the higher-ups. No need. King Kong shook his head indifferently. His mission was to rescue Princess Junko and manager Yoshiko. Since his mission was completed, it was natural for him to retreat. As for whether or not someone would chase after him, he was not worried at all. In fact, he even had some desire. He had not used the gun behind him yet. He wanted to see if his body could withstand the hot bullets. "Pack up. Everyone retreat." The street soon returned to calm. After waiting for about a quarter of an hour, a large number of Japanese army appeared. When the captain of the infantry saw that 30 of his companions had been killed by the arrows, he made the right decision. "Don't chase after them. I'm afraid that they have already run far away." It was not that they did not want to chase after them, but they could not chase after them at all. Otherwise, who knew if they would be able to come back alive? Weren't these 30 people lying on the ground without breathing a good example? Bomo City. It was close to the capital of the Japanese Empire, Ping Beijing, which could be regarded as the southern gate of the country. In the back garden, the emperor and the empress as well as their son were walking on the street of Bomo City. Oda Nagamasa was defeated and killed. As the mastermind behind the bombing of the general's office, this time when they returned to the palace of Ping in Beijing, they were afraid that they would be directly put under house arrest. Fortunately, he and his daughter escaped. Once Junko found the king of martial arts of the Daming South, she might be able to put pressure on Ashikaga Yoshimasa to improve her treatment. The emperor of the Japanese Empire actually entrusted all of his future to his daughter. This was a kind of irony for the emperor of the Japanese Empire, who was extremely patriarchal. He had already thought that the future was very bad. Even if it was his daughter, he just thought about it and did not have much hope. But he did not know that the reality was more cruel than he thought. A disaster was imminent. Empress Tenga was very beautiful. Whether the royal family had declined or not, after all, it was the face of the Japanese Empire. As the empress, it was necessary to be beautiful. Tenga was not only beautiful but also had a kind of intellectual beauty. Sometimes she would show a soft and feminine look. Because of this, her beauty was coveted by many men. It was just that in the palace, there were so many people protecting her that no one had the courage to do anything to her. But now it was different. On the way to the palace, the protection was a little lax. Especially Yuki Kiyomasa, who was in charge of escorting the empress, drank a lot of sake that night. Although the alcohol content of that thing was very low in the eyes of Wuxia people, it was not considered wine at all. But the most important thing was that Yuki Kiyomasa, who was a little confused, just happened to come to the room where Tenga was being held. Most of the houses in the Japanese Empire were made of paper. If one wanted to see what was inside, one only needed to gently poke at the window and everything would be clear at a glance. And when he looked, he just happened to see Tenga, who had just taken a bath and was wearing clothes. Although the time was a little late, sometimes the more hazy the feeling, the more it would arouse people's infinite imagination and even lead to crimes. Just as Yuki Kiyomasa's mind was in a confused state, after looking, he didn't know where he got the strength to push the door open and enter. The door opened from the outside and Tenga, who was only half-dressed, turned around in a panic. She saw Yuki Kiyomasa, whose eyes were red and had a lewd smile on his face, striding towards her. What are you doing? Someone come quickly. Out of a woman's intuition, Tengra knew what was going to happen next and couldn't help but shout in panic. Unfortunately, this was not the palace and there were maids everywhere. This was only a temporary resting place, and all the maids who had followed her out before had all run away. Otherwise, there wouldn't be no one waiting outside the door when the Empress was taking a bath. With her shouting, naturally no maids or servants came to protect the Empress. Unfortunately, Prince Ren, who was only 15 years old, came out to relieve himself and heard it. Although Prince Ren was indeed one of the most tragic emperors in the history of the Japanese Empire, he didn't lose his courage when he was young. After hearing his mother's shout, he hurriedly ran over and saw Yuki Kayomesa hugging his mother and biting her. No matter what, he was still a prince, the future emperor, and the one who was being bullied was his own mother. How could Prince Ren let it go? After shouting, he rushed over and wanted to kick Yuki Kayomesa, who was already somewhat unconscious, away. Since young, Prince Ren didn't train much and didn't do any physical work, so he didn't have much strength. The tearing didn't injure Yuki Kayomesa, and only tore off a piece of his clothes. Tengra took this opportunity to scratch his face, causing blood to flow out. The alcohol, the stimulation of blood, and the restless feeling in his body caused Yuki Kayomesa to temporarily lose his mind. Someone actually wanted to disturb him. In a fit of anger, he unsheathed the saber at his waist and abruptly slashed behind him. The poor and unprepared Prince Ren was slashed in the neck and blood splattered everywhere. With a pair of eyes wide open in disbelief, Prince Ren fell to the ground with a plop. After a few tremors, he stopped breathing. His life ended like this, and he didn't have to live the rest of his life like a coward. He didn't know if it was a good or bad thing for him. After killing someone, Yuki Kayomesa's mind became much clearer. Especially when he saw that the person he killed was the successor of the Emperor Prince Ren, he finally knew how big of a mistake he had made and his whole body trembled. Her son died in front of her, and as a mother, Tengra went crazy on the spot. She pounced on Yuki Kayomesa, wanting to avenge her son. She wanted to kill the murderer who destroyed her hope in life. Several scratches appeared on his face. At first, Yuki Kayomesa tried to avoid them because of her identity, but after a long time he was a little annoyed, and in anger he stabbed forward with his sword. He originally wanted to scare this woman, but he didn't expect that Tengra would rush over when he stabbed her, and then. There was no then. After Prince Ren died, there was another corpse in the room. Ha 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 ha. After a while, Yuki Kayomesa looked up to the sky and laughed. He didn't expect that he would kill the Empress and a prince just because he drank a little too much. Presumably, if this matter was spread out, he would definitely be punished severely. It was even possible that his family would be exterminated. Chapter 1075. Since this was the case, he might as well go all the way and kill them all. At this moment, Kaizuki Kumi rushed to the place where the emperor rested. He only wanted to eliminate the root of the problem. Perhaps this was the only way for him to survive. Then, the Queen of Heaven died, Prince Ren died, and the emperor also died. They all died under Kaizuki Kumi's blade. Then he called his soldiers to disguise the bodies of the three people. After the traces of a fight were left on the scene, the sky was already bright. Kaizuki Kumi carefully thought about his words. After there were no loopholes, he wrote an urgent memorial and sent it to General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was commanding the battle on the battlefield. Of course, Kaizuki Kumi would not admit that these three people were killed by him. He only said that someone wanted to kidnap them at night, and he led his soldiers to fight a hard battle. In the end, the people who rescued them escaped, but in the chaos, the emperor's family of three was killed. This big event, as the only relative of the three people who died, Princess Junko didn't know about it. After being rescued by King Kong and other members of the Wolf Fong Special Forces, they rushed all the way to Chongmen Prefecture. Along the way, they encountered several enemy encirclements, and one of them was a ninja team, but under the protection of King Kong and others, they all passed through safely. Half a month later, they finally broke through the layers of obstacles and came to Chongmen Prefecture. They came to the front gate of the 5-star Army's barracks. Let's go to see the 6th young master. After Tomiko saw the 5-star Army's flag hanging high in the barracks, the long-time pressure finally completely relaxed at this moment, and then she proposed her idea to Tomiko. Can I wash first? Tomiko didn't immediately agree but said shyly. Tomiko noticed that Tomiko's face was dirty. How could she let the sixth young master see this? She immediately smiled and said, "Of course. I will have to trouble Captain King Kong. Follow me." King Kong nodded solemnly and led the two of them to the barracks. In the main tent, Yang Qindong already knew that Junko had returned safely, but there was no smile on his face. Because of the news that the Japanese Empire's emperor and his family of 3 had been killed, Yeshen was brought back by Tai Hu, the leader of the Langia Special Forces. When King Kong was sent to Zhongda City to rescue Junko, Tai Hu was also ordered to go to Ping and Beijing to rescue the emperor of the Japanese Empire. Yang Qindong had already made arrangements for the future of the emperor's family, which was to leave the Japanese Empire and go to a place where no one knew their identity to enjoy the rest of their lives. In the end, Yang Qindong still couldn't bear to make the decision to kill them. However, he also wouldn't allow some people to interfere with his matters. The final decision was to get the emperor's family out of here. But the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. When Tai Hu and the others rushed all the way to the Bomo area, they had already received the news that the emperor's family of 3 had been killed. Tai Hu didn't believe it but carried out an investigation. They caught one of the 9 demon soldiers who was responsible for cleaning up the battlefield and then learned the whole story. Everything that happened was somewhat beyond Yang Qindong's expectation. But overall it was a good thing because it relieved some of Yang Qindong's worries, and gave him the most honorable reason to send troops to the Japanese Empire. But Junko came back. How could he explain all this to her? But Yoshiko came back with her. Yang Qindong finally decided to leave the matter to others. He really didn't want to see Junko's sad face. Send someone to call Yoshiko. I have something to say to her. King Kong's ability was not bad. Even in the wartime military camp, he still found a bathtub and asked someone to boil enough hot water. Junko was able to wash herself from head to toe, and then changed into the new clothes that had been prepared for her. Then Yoshiko came, and as soon as she appeared, her eyes were red. Obviously she had cried. Speaking of which, when she was in the palace of Ping in Beijing, the emperor's family was also good to her, so she had some feelings for them. Junko. Seeing Princess Junko, who had just bathed and revealed her peerless face, Yoshiko's eyes were red again and tears flowed out uncontrollably. After a while, there was another heart-wrenching cry from the big tent. The sky was dotted with stars, and after a day of fighting, everything returned to calm. Junko was also calm, and she was accompanied by Yoshiko walking out of a big tent. Just now she saw the soldier of the 9 demons who used to be a guard in the palace, so Junko knew him. From the mouth of this person, Junko knew the whole story, but she had already cried for an afternoon, and her tears had dried up, so she didn't cry anymore. After coming out of the big tent, the silence was somewhat frightening. Where is Sensei's tent? Please take me there. Looking at Captain King Kong accompanying her, Junko asked. In the main tent, Yang Qindong was still looking at the sand table in front of him, thinking about the next military plan. There was a sound of footsteps outside the door and Beta Persei came in. Young master, Princess Junko is here and she wants to see you. Yang Qindong did not answer immediately. He first let out a sigh. He knew that what should come would eventually come. Well, bring her in. No one else is allowed to enter without orders. Yes. Beta Persei agreed and stepped back. Junko, who looked a little haggard, then walked into the big tent. The main tent was lit with candles, and when the candles reflected on people's faces, it could show the most beautiful side. It was like looking at a beauty under the moon, and the more you looked, the more beautiful she became. Especially at this moment, Junko's eyes were filled with tears, which gave people a delicate feeling. Sensei. Junko. At this moment their eyes focused together. Perhaps it was because he hadn't touched a woman since the war, or perhaps it was because of Junko's influence in his heart, but at this moment when Yang Qindong looked at Junko he had a different feeling. Especially when their eyes were intertwined. At first glance she was like a pear blossom with spring rain. At first glance she was like west shining water by 3 points. At first glance she was more like a beauty that shamed the moon. At first glance, Sensei. Junko threw herself into Yang Qindong's arms, and tears flowed out uncontrollably. Sensei, Junko has no relatives. Junko is very pitiful. Junko, don't worry, I will be your family from now on. Yang Qindong said, lowered his head and wanted to wipe the tears on Junko's face. But what greeted him was warm lips, and Junko took the initiative to lean over. Junko, who had just found her family, found a sense of security, and was no longer tied down by her family. Her heart was at its softest, and at this moment she decided to let go of herself and not suppress her feelings for Yang Qindong. In the face of a beauty taking the initiative to throw herself into his arms, Yang Qindong had no intention to refuse. Although he was taking advantage of her, if he refused, he was afraid that it would only hurt Junko's heart. At this moment he increased the strength in his hands, and after a while he picked Junko up by the waist and walked straight to the big bed in the inner room of the main tent. Thunder stirred up the earth fire. Outside the main tent, Beta Persei signaled with his eyes, and all the long way retreated 20 meters, clearing the entire tent. After a night of spring rain, Yang Qindong got up from the bed energetically. He didn't disturb Junko, who was sleeping. Fleeing all the way and then hearing the news of the death of her parents and brother, she had suffered too much and should have a good rest. He took the initiative to walk out of the tent and received the generals outside. First, he met with the commander of the 1st Division, 2nd Division and 3rd Division. After listening to today's battle plan, he approved it. After watching the 3 division commanders leave, Yang Qindong waved to Division Commander Tian Hu, Commander Su He and Division Commander Su Ku of the 1st Reserve Division. Come here and discuss the next step of the battle plan. 6th Young Master, are we finally ready to fight? Hearing Yang Qindong's call, the 3 generals were excited. Yes. Yang Qindong nodded. After 20 days of stalemate, both sides had suffered losses. The original 60,000 soldiers of the Alien Alliance had been replenished twice in a row. If one counted carefully, nearly 20,000 people died in the battle and countless people were injured. Of course, the Japanese Empire on the other side was not much better, and their losses would only be greater. But even so, Yang Qindong didn't intend to send out the elite force. First, he still needed to continue to confuse the other side and make them underestimate the enemy. Second, this time they didn't have a proper reason to send out the troops. The intelligence agency at the front sent news that the Japanese Empire's people were very resistant to the appearance of the 5-star army. So, there were a lot of young people from the Japanese Empire who had signed up to join the army. Ashikaga Yoshimasa also took the opportunity to recruit more soldiers. If this continued, unless they used firearms and razed the entire island to the ground, it would be extremely difficult to occupy this place. Now Junko had come. She was the princess of the Japanese Empire and the only remaining member of the Japanese Empire's royal family. Her appearance could naturally mean a lot of things. It could also help the 5-star army turn from an invading army into a righteous army. Once there was enough righteousness to support it, it would naturally be time to launch an all-out counterattack. Yang Qindong called a commander and 2 division commanders to talk about the next war plan. He wanted to make all the preparations in advance. Late in the morning, Junko slowly opened her eyes. Separated by the main tent, there was no dazzling sunlight in the room, making people feel very comfortable. As soon as Junko opened her eyes, Tomiko appeared in front of her. Not only her, but there were also 6 maids standing on the side. These were the maids who came to serve Junko. From this moment on, Junko had officially become Yang Qindong's woman. If she wanted, she could quickly become the 8th wife. Chapter 1076. Princess, you're awake. Tomiko looked at Junko, who still had doubts in her eyes, and smiled gently. Then she began to order people to help Junko dress up. During this process, Tomiko told Junko that Yang Qindong wanted to take her as a concubine. As a princess of the Japanese Empire, marrying someone as a concubine was a disgrace to her status. However, looking at Xianxia's current power, Junko was the one who benefited. Especially now that the Japanese Empire's royal family had already declined, this was a great blessing for Junko. Despite knowing this, Junko still didn't agree immediately. Instead, she said that she wanted to see Yang Qindong first before making a decision. Not long after, everyone else in the main tent went out. Yang Qindong was also invited back to meet Junko in the main tent. After a night, there seemed to be a gap between the two. Junko didn't take the initiative to throw herself into his arms. Instead, she stared at Yang Qindong with a thoughtful look. In response, Yang Qindong sat down leisurely. He took a sip of the tea in front of him and let Junko look at him from head to toe. After a long time, Junko finally spoke. Sensei, why did you bring the army to the Japanese Empire this time? To save you. Yang Qindong answered in a very capable manner without the slightest hesitation. Obviously, he already knew what Junko wanted to ask. This answer made Junko feel a little touched. However, thinking of her own doubts, she didn't express anything. Instead, she continued to ask, Sensei, now that my father, mother, and brother are all dead, the internal strife in the Japanese Empire is about to be quelled. If I ask you to withdraw the army now, will you do so? Yes. Yang Qindong still said without any hesitation. His answer was so straightforward that it made Junko feel like she couldn't believe it. Although this was indeed what she wanted to hear, she still suppressed her joy and said, All right then, teacher, please give the order to retreat. Yang Qindong stood up and strode out of the tent. From the moment he came in to the moment he left, he had only said 4 words, but it had already broken through all the defenses in Junko's heart. At this moment she finally stopped being reserved and took the initiative to run behind Yang Qindong and hugged him. Teacher, everything is just Junko's test. Please don't blame me and don't withdraw the army. Yang Qindong pretended to be confused, but in his heart he already had a card up his sleeve. He turned around, looked at Junko and said, If the 5-star army doesn't retreat with our strength, it won't be long before the Japanese Empire becomes one of Xianxia's subordinate provinces. Don't you understand this logic? I understand. Then why are you still? Yang Qindong pretended to be confused and said, Junko also understands that the Japanese Empire has nothing to do with me anymore. It abandoned us first, abandoned the entire royal family. In order to prove their mistake, the Japanese Empire must be destroyed. This is the price they have to pay for killing my parents and brother. Teacher, you will definitely help you get revenge, right? Junko looked at Yang Qindong with a hopeful face, waiting for his answer. But unexpectedly, Yang Qindong shook his head decisively. This time we mobilized the army for your safety. Now that you are fine, the 5-star army has to retreat. We are not an invader, we are the army of justice. Before this, the Japanese Empire didn't provoke us, so. At first, when Yang Qindong said that they could retreat, Junko was still a little doubtful. But now what he said made her even more determined. She finally knew that the 5-star army didn't have any intention of attacking the Japanese Empire. They really only wanted to save her. At this moment, Junko's heart was moved. At the same time, she was even more determined to avenge her parents. She even wanted to slap all the people in power in the Japanese Empire and let them know the consequences of abandoning the royal family. In order to let Yang Qindong do something, Junko took the initiative and said, I am willing to be your 8th wife. If someone bullied your wife's family and cruelly killed them, can you avenge her? Junko looked at Yang Qindong, who was still hesitating. She gently pulled his arm like a spoiled child. This is something that should be done. Yang Qindong said with a helpless look. After saying this, Yang Qindong felt a little guilty. He also knew that this matter couldn't be hidden from the smart Junko for long. He was afraid that she had already noticed something, but presumably no one would ever mention this topic again. Thank you, Sensei. Then please send the troops. When the time comes, I will denounce Ashikaga Yoshimasa in the name of the royal family's princess. I will let the people of the Japanese Empire know who harmed the royal family, who started the civil war, and who wants to overthrow the Japanese Empire. The more Junko said, the more determined her expression became. Just from this point alone, she had already made up her mind. Seeing another country send troops to destroy her own country, and it was because of her own request, no one would be in a good mood. But Junko didn't feel any unhappiness at this moment. On the contrary, her heart was filled with hatred, and she longed for the happiness that victory would bring her. Since this country had abandoned his imperial father and imperial mother, then let it perish. Okay, I promise you. Yang Qindong was waiting for this result to appear. It seemed that she was just a woman. She couldn't mount a horse to wield a sword, nor could she kill the enemy. But she was the princess of the Japanese Empire, the last remaining member of the Japanese Empire's royal family. The situation was completely different. With Junko's support, Yang Qindong had a righteous cause and he had a good reason to send troops. What's more, the original Japanese Empire wasn't united. The Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa seemed to have a monopoly on power, but there were still many hidden opponents. It was just that they were too scattered and couldn't form a united force. In the past, the Emperor of the Back Garden was unable to integrate this power together, but Yang Qindong did have such strength, because he had the strength to compete with Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and was even stronger than him. In other people's eyes, this was a big tree, a tree that was far more luxuriant than the Supreme General. Junko's heart was filled with hatred, and with Yang Qindong's support, she quickly wrote a document to announce to the world. First, she described in detail the cause of her father, mother, and brother's death. Then she pointed at Ashikaga Yoshimasa and said that this villain wanted to overthrow the power of the royal family and bring a disaster to the entire Japanese empire. Finally, she called on all the heroes of the Japanese empire to work together to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa and restore the Japanese empire to its former glory. This document was read and approved by Yang Qindong, and it was sent out. It appeared in various cities of the Japanese empire through the intelligence network, causing a huge response and influence. Hokuriku, one of the 7 provinces of the Japanese empire. As one of the most important regions of the Japanese empire, it was under the jurisdiction of General Hirei. Hirei, whose full name was Flatwell Field, was one of the more trusted and important ministers of the Backyard Emperor. When he was in the imperial court, he caused a lot of trouble for Ashikaga Yoshimasa, so much so that the latter spent a lot of effort to get rid of him. In order to achieve his goal, he even handed Hokuriku over to him. According to Ashikaga Yoshimasa's plan, once Flatwell Field left the palace and the Emperor of the Backyard, he could kill him at any time. Not only would he solve his worries, but he would also be able to vent his anger. However, Flatwell Field was much more powerful than he had imagined. After leaving Ping and Beijing, he disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in Ekizan prefecture of Hokuriku and had taken control of part of the military power there. This result made Ashikaga Yoshimasa furious. Just as he was about to send troops to deal with him, the bombing of the general's residence happened. He had no choice but to shift his attention to dealing with Oda Nagamasa and the imperial family. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Flatwell Field went all out and integrated the power of the entire Hokuriku. He was ready to cooperate with Oda Nagamasa and help the imperial family regain all their power. However, everything changed a little too quickly. Flatwell Field had just finished the integration work when news of Oda Nagamasa's defeat and the death of the imperial family came from the front lines. When he first heard the news, Flatwell Field couldn't believe it. When he found out that it was true and not fake news deliberately spread by someone, he couldn't stop crying. He found that he suddenly had no goal, no target or object to be loyal to. Flatwell Field was a very thoughtful and capable person. Usually, such a person would be able to see the most crucial point in a chaotic situation and make the right choice. It was because of this ability that he couldn't stop crying. In his eyes, without the imperial family, there was no one in the Japanese empire who could suppress General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Because he was a smart person and could see this, he felt that there was no hope ahead. He could even see that after eliminating the imperial family, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's next target would be him. Without the support of the imperial family, Flatwell Field knew that there was no way he could reach the heights of the general with his own ability. Even if he couldn't win, the only way left was to escape. Fortunately, he had led his troops to conquer Noden Prefecture. Behind it was the vast ocean, which was his escape route. Flatwell Field withdrew his troops and stockpiled food and money. He was ready to retreat at any time. It was at this time that the letter written by Junko announced to the world that the last member of the royal family, the last hope, spoke in her unique voice. When Junko's letter suddenly appeared on the street after one night, Flatwell Field, who was ready to retreat, saw hope again. After shouting "God has eyes" in his mansion, he gathered all his important subordinates. He decided to cooperate with Junko to deal a heavy blow to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. As long as there was a way to survive, no one would choose to leave their home. As long as there was a little hope of victory, everyone would want to fight. Flatwell Field was such a person. Chapter 1077. In the entire Japanese Empire, Flatwell Field wasn't the only one. Some of them were targeted by Ashikaga Yoshimasa and could be retaliated against at any time. Some didn't like the Supreme General and would look for an opportunity to stab him in the back. Some had the same ambition and knew that only by eliminating Ashikaga Yoshimasa would they have a chance to succeed. No matter what kind of thoughts they had, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was too powerful, had obviously become the target of many people's hidden attacks. Especially when Princess Junko's document was released, it gave these people a suitable excuse. Soon the anti-Supreme General's forces began to appear everywhere, and the situation took a major turn. Flatwell Field of Hokuriku was the first to respond. Under the leadership of Princess Junko, he gathered 80,000 troops in Ekizan Prefecture and acted as if they were going to attack Ashikaga Yoshimasa's lair from Ping and Beijing. Everything was afraid of someone taking the lead. Flatwell Field's actions quickly received responses from everywhere. For a time, the Japanese Empire was filled with anti-Supreme General voices. The people of the Japanese Empire were also confused because of all these voices. Originally, the Supreme General's name was very well known in the hearts of the people. In addition, the Emperor of the Backyard, who was threatened, had publicly said more than once that the Japanese Empire was where it was today because of the Supreme General. This caused some people who didn't know the truth to believe in Ashikaga Yoshimasa. This was also the reason why when the 5-star army suddenly appeared, Ashikaga Yoshimasa raised his arms and called for enlistment in the name of the Supreme General. That was because everyone believed in him. But now, with the uproar in various places, especially those who were unfavorable to Ashikaga Yoshimasa, most of the people began to wait and see. What? The 100,000 new soldiers that Takeda prepared aren't coming? Ashikaga Yoshimasa angrily looked at General Maori Masanori, who was reporting the situation to him, in the temporary residence of Yasunori district. The Maori regularization, who was not tall and had small eyes, was being reprimanded with his head lowered. He knew that he would be scolded this time, but he still came. Since some things had changed, he had to report it to the general in advance so that he could make countermeasures. Yes, General. It's not just the 100,000 new soldiers from Donghai province who are not coming. The new armies from other regions are also facing some problems. Ashikaga Yoshimasa cursed angrily and slammed his palm on the desk in front of him. His eyes were burning with anger. Of course, he knew why such a problem had occurred. It was all because of the document Princess Junko had announced to the world. To be honest, he didn't think much of this woman at first. Even when Kiyoshi reported that someone wanted to save the emperor and was killed by him, he wasn't angry. Instead, he was a little happy. For a long time, the royal family had been a huge dark cloud over his head. Although he tried his best to weaken the influence and sense of existence of the other party, it had to be said that more people still recognized the royal family. Many forces that opposed him often used the royal family's name to suppress him. Finally, they were all dead. Although from the information he received, it was very likely that it was done by his subordinate Kiyoshi in private. This matter was not directed by him. Wasn't this the will of the heavens? Did the heavens want the royal family to die? Did the heavens want to give him, the general, a chance to rise? Without the existence of the royal family, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was ready to ascend the throne. As for whether there would be opposition forces, so what? He would fight and win them over. He often used such methods, and the reason why he was able to reach his current position was because of this set of methods that had made a miraculous contribution. He was even more convinced that any schemes, tricks, and the actions of villains were not worth mentioning in front of absolute strength. As for the sudden appearance of the 150,000 5-star army, Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't pay much attention to them. After fighting for these days, he believed that he had grasped the strength of the other party. They were only a little stronger than the ordinary army of the Japanese Empire, but their number was still small, so there was no need to worry. Originally, the situation was good. As long as he could force the 5-star army to retreat, he could withdraw and deal with the forces that opposed him. Finally, he could destroy them one by one and achieve his goal of becoming the emperor. But all of this was completely changed because of the appearance of Junko. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was just a woman. Even if she was reborn in the back garden, he wouldn't have the slightest fear. But the most amazing thing was that Junko's announcement made the 5-star army and the forces in the country who opposed him have a common language and can walk together. As a result, he became a rat crossing the street and everyone wanted to beat him up. According to the Maori regularization, the people who opposed him were gradually gathering. Once these people really gathered together, even if he was the general, it would be difficult for him to gain any advantage. It was even possible that he would be defeated and killed. Let Nishi Toshihide negotiate with the great southern martial king. We can give them some benefits. After solving the domestic problem, it won't be too late to deal with them. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a person who stood at the top for many years, so he quickly made the right decision. Nishi Toshihide was born in an aristocratic family. He was very famous in the Japanese Empire for being eloquent. This person was not only knowledgeable, but also learned martial arts from an early age. He was one of the talents that Ashikaga Yoshimasa relied on the most. After receiving the order, he set off from Anyun Prefecture to Nagato Prefecture, and sent his name to the 5-star Army's camp first. This person is very cunning and agile. He is good at both civil and martial arts. He is an important helper of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. After reading the name, Junko told everything she knew to her husband Yang Chendong. After returning to China for 2 years, Junko had a more detailed understanding of the situation in the Japanese Empire. With her identity plus the importance that the emperor attached to her, it was not difficult to know some secrets. With this feature, she became one of Yang Chendong's strategists to attack the Japanese Empire. Oh, so powerful? Yang Chendong asked with interest. Yes, King, I suggest that you kill this person. Junko's eyes were firm. Since she was with Yang Chendong, she also changed the way she addressed him. She used to call him teacher, but now she called him king. It represented a kind of maturity and progress. With this relationship, she was confident that she could take the opportunity to kill Nishi Toshihide. It could be considered as collecting a little interest for the death of her father and mother. As the saying goes, the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. This time, Junko was destined to be disappointed, because Yang Chendong did not listen to her suggestion. Instead, he shook his head and said, "How can I break this rule and let others laugh at me?" Yang Chendong did things based on his heart. Sometimes, in order to achieve his goals, it was inevitable that he would use some underhanded means. For a person like him, the saying of not killing the messenger in a war had nothing to do with him, but he still used this as a reason to say it. This only proved that he didn't want to take Ningxi Duoxio's life yet. Since Junko's letter was announced to the world, the situation in the Japanese Empire had undergone a major change. This change was, of course, what Yang Chendong wanted to see, but it was still too far away from the final victory. What Yang Chendong wanted was not to surrender but to destroy. What Yang Chendong wanted was not for everyone to surrender to the Japanese Empire's royal family and Princess Junko, but for them to surrender to him, to submit to the 5-star army and to submit to the Han dynasty. In order to achieve this goal, he needed to severely damage the local army of the Japanese Empire. Before the final goal was achieved, he didn't want to see any side win. What he wanted was for Ashikaga Yoshimasa to fight with the other forces and for both sides to suffer. In order to achieve this goal, a talent like Nishi Toshihide had to display his strength. How could he let him die so easily in front of him? Junko naturally didn't know about Yang Chendong's thoughts. She thought that this was the honest side of her husband, so she immediately expressed her admiration and said, "My king, are you really going to negotiate with them? The war has already reached this point and they killed your parents and brother. How can we negotiate?" Yang Chendong chuckled, then said to Beta Persei behind him, "Go, inform them that after Nishi Toshihide enters our camp, everything will be carried out according to the first plan." Junko didn't know what the first plan was, but soon on the 3rd day Nishi Toshihide came to the big tent of the 5-star army. After seeing Yang Chendong and Junko, the result was quickly announced to the world. Nishi Toshihide came. Compared to the average people of the Japanese Empire, he was 1.75 meters tall, which was not short at that time. His facial features were regular, he had thick eyebrows and big eyes, and he spoke very humbly and warmly, giving people a good first impression. "Please." Yang Chendong smiled and sat opposite Nishi Toshihide with Junko. Tomiko was responsible for serving the brewed tea. Tomiko, who was originally the CIA's supervisor in the Japanese Empire, has now become the person Junko trusts the most. After reporting to the CIA, the 5th Madame Summonaire gave her to Junko and became her personal maid. "Thank you." Ningxi Duoxio spoke in a somewhat awkward but still understandable Chinese. After she finished speaking, she suddenly lowered her head, fully displaying her humble side. Haha, I didn't expect Nishi Toshihide to also know Chinese. That will eliminate the language barrier. Come try the tea of my Wuxia, this is a good tea before the Ming dynasty. Yang Qindong had a smile on his face, looking harmless to humans and animals. The meeting between the two sides was carried out in such a peaceful atmosphere. During the meeting, Nishi Toshihide observed Yang Qindong more than once. No matter how he looked at it, he couldn't connect the person who destroyed many countries and forces in the southern barbarian land of the Great Ming Dynasty with the young man in front of him. Chapter 1078. Although Ningxi Daoxiu was familiar with some Chinese, he probably didn't know that there was an old saying in Wuxia, keep your strength hidden. There was even a less elegant saying among the people, a dog that bites doesn't bark. Just as the two sides were negotiating, the five-star army had already implemented the first set of plans and was in the process of implementing them. To Yang Qindong, there really wasn't much to talk about with the Japanese Empire. Thinking about the various things that would happen in the future, in order to prevent the painful scenes of the people of Wuxia from happening again, he felt that it was necessary for him to resolve some problems in advance. In the large tent, the tea drinking continued. It seemed that both sides had no intention of immediately entering into negotiations. Of course, Ningxi Daoxiu took the initiative to bring it up a few times, but it was all resolved by Yang Qindong. It was as if they were really reminiscing about the past, even though there was nothing to talk about. Outside the large tent, or rather outside the main tent, the world's 1st Cavalry Division, the Grasslands' new army and the 1st Reserve Division had all set out, charging straight towards the Japanese Empire's army. The competition between the two sides had been going on for a long time. Both sides had suffered casualties and both sides had won and lost. This was the most realistic way to describe it. After a long period of fighting, the Japanese army had already gotten used to the five-star army's fighting style and combat strength. Ningxi Daoxiu had already gone to the five-star army's main camp to begin negotiations. Some of the more optimistic people even thought that the war would end soon. How would the Japanese army know that the ones who had fought with them before were just some foreign allied forces that had just entered the battlefield? Their combat strength couldn't be said to be the weakest of the five-star army, but there was still a large gap between them and the strongest. The reason why they had chosen to fight to the death with the Japanese army was to deplete the number of foreign men, and also to train the soldiers. Of course, the most important point was to show the enemy that they were weak. Now it seemed that their goals had been achieved. Once there was an outstanding seedling in the foreign allied forces, they would quickly be selected by the 1st Reserve Division. This rhythm of selecting elite soldiers and sending inferior soldiers to their deaths caused the 3 foreign allied forces to suffer heavy losses. It also allowed the 1st Reserve Division to expand from the original 20,000 to 30,000 people. These 30,000 people were veterans who had experienced the baptism of war. They were veterans who had climbed out of piles of corpses. Their strength could be imagined. But they weren't the strongest. The 1st Cavalry Division was the trump card of the five-star army. They were in existence was comparable to the Cold Vanguard Army, and even better in this kind of battle. The trump cards trumps army's side. As a daimyo, Tanaka had 50,000 soldiers in his hands. Under the orders of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, he was responsible for the left wing of the 1st and 2nd lines of defense in Nagato Prefecture. He and another daimyo named Kazumi became the 2 gatekeepers, blocking the advance of the five-star army. With the support of the general, although the 2 daimyo suffered heavy losses in the battle against the 1st, 2nd and 3rd divisions, the soldiers were quickly recovered, and the military system was perfected, which made them very satisfied. It wasn't like he would be the one to die. This kind of hard work could still be seen by the Grand General. Once the war was over, he would definitely be rewarded for his contributions. That would be the time when he would be promoted to the position of a general. Thinking that once he became a general, he would be second only to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. No matter what Kazumi thought, Tanaka was really happy. In particular, Nishi Daoxiu also went to the five-star army's camp to negotiate, which was tantamount to the war coming to an end. Seeing that the overall situation was settled, his mood was even better. When people were in a good mood, they would naturally infect others. Just last night, Tanaka gathered the 2 chiefs, several county magistrates, and generals under him to drink until they were drunk. The war had been going on for more than a month and everyone's spirits were too tense. It was time to relax. In Tanaka's eyes, since Nishidoxiu was sent to negotiate and the five-star army agreed, it at least proved that the war would not happen again in a short time and they could relax. This was a conventional way of thinking and there was nothing wrong with it. But if people fully understood Yang Qindong's habits, they would find that this was not a person who played according to common sense at all. Often the rules that everyone thought were the rules, he simply turned a blind eye to them. Otherwise he wouldn't have expanded the Xianxia army to such a scale in just a few years. In the early morning, Tanaka and his generals were still sleeping in the big tent, and the tent was full of the smell of alcohol. It could be seen that they really drank a lot last night. In addition, they found some military geisha to adjust the atmosphere and it was quite successful. Those who could drink half a caddy drank half a caddy. Those who could drink half a caddy drank half a caddy. Those who could drink half a caddy drank nearly 2 caddies and they all fell to the ground. In the big tent, the sound of snoring, teeth grinding and sleep-talking came one after another. Compared to the so-called relaxation of the Japanese army's higher-ups, the soldiers below also became a lot more relaxed because there was no leader to manage them. In the morning, the soldiers didn't get up to exercise, but sat together in groups of 3 or 5 to chat. If the leaders needed to relax, why wouldn't they? Everyone was enjoying this short period of peace during the war. There were even some soldiers who, because they were too tired from the continuous fighting, went back to sleep after waking up in the morning to check that the army was fine. This was called, subordinates follow the example of their superiors. Without anyone to manage them, the soldiers were like a mass of loose sand. They each took care of their own things and once something happened they would only fight for themselves. 6 miles away from the Japanese Empire's camp, the 1st Heavenly Cavalry Division was quickly gathering. On the other side, 5 miles away, the new army was also gathering, and they were all preparing for the upcoming battle. Commander, there is still half a quarter of an hour before the 6th Young Master's scheduled attack time. The 1st Regiment Commander, Taimura, walked to Tianhu's side and reported softly, the new army should also be ready to attack. I heard that they are very excited and are preparing to fight a good battle to steal the limelight of our 1st Heavenly Cavalry Division. Tianhu didn't take Taimura's words to heart. Instead he said something very proud, how can the limelight of our 1st Cavalry Division be suppressed by others? Hehe. Seeing how confident his commander was, Taimur laughed. Strictly speaking, Taimur had joined the 5-star army earlier than Tianhu. When he was fighting on horseback, Tianhu was still a good student in the Yang family academy. However, he wasn't unhappy that he was able to become a regiment commander under Tianhu's command. It was all because he was convinced. Whether it was horseback riding, control of the battlefield, or commanding an army, Taimur didn't think that he was better than Tianhu. For example, some of the orders given by the higher-ups. Why didn't they attack in the middle of the night or at daybreak? Why did it have to be at daybreak when the enemy should have woken up before attacking? What was the reason for all of this? Why did the 6th Young Master give such an order? To be honest, Taimur didn't understand. If he was the commander of a regiment he would definitely ask why. However, Tianhu didn't. The one who sent the order was Beta Persei. He only said that it was the 6th Young Master's order and Tianhu carried it out unconditionally. He was at the scene when this happened. Just based on this calmness, it wasn't something he could compare to. Tianhu was indeed smart. This had to do with his background as a student of the Yang family academy. Because he learned from Yang Qindong, he could understand more of Yang Qindong's intentions in many matters. For example, he had his own unique views on the timing of the attack this time. In his opinion, this should be Yang Qindong's intention to defeat the enemy fair and square. Through this battle he could show the elite and powerful side of the 5-star army and achieve the purpose of intimidating the enemy. Of course, there was another advantage to fighting during the day. It would be easier to capture more captives. After all, vision was not good in the dark and it was too chaotic. It was very easy for deserters to escape. This idea was indeed correct. Yang Qindong did have such an idea. He wanted to defeat the Japanese army in broad daylight on the battlefield and use this to build the 5-star army. Once the elites were deployed, they would be invincible in the world. When the defeated Japanese army saw this scene with their own eyes, word of mouth spread. Presumably, when the name of the 5-star army was mentioned in the future, everyone would tremble from the bottom of their souls. If he wanted to achieve his goal, It was impossible to do it in the dark. The light was not good and it was impossible to see what was happening. It was also impossible to do it when it was just dawn. Most people were still in a confused state and could not make a clear judgment. However, it was different after daybreak. Everyone was up and could make a clear judgment. As for whether this would bring some pressure to the 1st Cavalry Division and the new army, Yang Qindong really did not think that it would be a problem. Needless to say, the 1st Cavalry Division was invincible. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were invincible. It was common for them to win with fewer people, especially after the Japanese army had adapted to the attack rhythm of the Foreign Alliance's C-rank army. It would be strange if the A-rank army did not suddenly appear and cause the enemy to panic. As for the new army, their combat strength was a bit weaker. If they were not cavalry, they would not be ranked as the army closest to the A-rank army. However, they had more people and more horses. Once the 30,000-strong cavalry launched an attack, just the aura they exuded was unstoppable. No one could match them. Facing such a strong army, not to mention that it was the time for peace talks, the Japanese army would not be prepared. Even if the enemy was prepared, so what? Yang Qindong was also confident that he could kill the enemy. One would throw away their armor and the other would be utterly defeated. The 5-star army did indeed have such strength. All of this was not because Yang Qindong was arrogant. It was the result of battle after battle. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.